Act 1. The Black Crown. Chapter 1. The Throne. Vael opened his eyes during an audience. The throne hall stretched 400 paces from the doors to the dais. 12 obsidian pillars. Black banners with the silver crown sigil. 2,000 spectators along the side galleries. Nobles, attachés, ambassadors from the lesser demon clans. 9 generals stood in a semicircle below the dais in full ceremonial armor. A man knelt on the marble floor 20 paces in front of him. The man was speaking. Vael had been listening for some time. The part of him that had been here a century had been listening, but he himself had only just arrived. The kneeling man was a tax collector from the southern provinces. He was reporting late harvest yields. He was reporting them with the specific, careful tone of a man who knew his life depended on the next sentence. Vael, the new tenant, let the old body finish its planned response. The body said, in a voice deeper than the new tenant had expected, approved. The grace period extends 1 quarter. Withdraw. The tax collector pressed his forehead to the floor. He withdrew. The audience moved on. Vael sat very still on the throne and let the new memories settle. The name was real. The body was real. The 100-year reign was real. He was the 3rd demon king of the present dynasty. His seat had been won by killing the 2nd, his own father, in single combat 93 years ago. He had not, in the 93 years since, lost a fight. The audience continued. He led it. 3 more supplicants. A trade dispute. A petition from a Frost clan elder. A report from the eastern garrison. He processed. He had the body's full memory. He had the throne's full intelligence. He had, behind that, the small thin sliver of his own previous life. A man who had read too many books before dying. One of those books had been about this place. He remembered fragments. A protagonist named Aren. A monastery. A train party of heroes. A final confrontation at this same throne in the 3rd volume of a novel he could not, on honest reflection, remember the title of. He remembered, specifically, one thing. He remembered that the protagonist won. He remembered the demon king died. He remembered, in the novel, the demon king had been arrogant. The demon king had believed himself unbeatable. The demon king had not moved against the heroes while they were training because the demon king had not considered them a threat until they were already at the gates. Vael, on the throne, made his first decision. He was not going to be arrogant. The audience ended at the 3rd bell of afternoon. The hall emptied. The generals filed out. The court attendants departed. The throne hall settled into the specific silence of a great chamber after a long ceremony. Vael stood. He walked, in the precise, unhurried pace the body knew, off the dais and out through the rear private corridor. 2 black-clad personal guards fell in behind him at the standard distance. He did not look at them. He had walked this corridor every day for 93 years. He went to the private chambers. The chambers were on the 3rd level of the inner fortress. 3 rooms, a study, a sleeping chamber, a small audience room for private councils. The walls were warded with formations older than the dynasty. He dismissed the guards at the door. He entered alone. He sat at the study desk. He took a quill from the desk's holder. He set out a clean sheet of black veined paper. He began to write. The list he wrote was a list of names. The first 9 names were the demon generals. He wrote each one, and beside each name, he wrote a single notation drawn from the body's memory of how that general had behaved across 93 years. More Iron Warden of the 1st Legion. Oldest serving general, 91 years on his post. Personally elevated him to the seat. Loyal to the seat, not to the man. Will follow whoever sits the throne. Reliable. Res. Frostfawn clan, mistress of the 2nd Legion. 44 years on her post. Personal interest in the throne since her promotion. Has not yet acted on the interest. Watching for weakness. Voth. Crimson Wing, Drake Rider, commander of the 3rd Legion. 62 years on his post. Loyal in the personal sense. Bonded oath at his confirmation. Cannot easily betray. Skara. Bone Right, Necromancer, 4th Legion. 38 years on her post. Loyal to the dynasty. Indifferent to the man. Will follow the seat if the seat continues to fund her research. Kev. Stormhowl, Beast Tamer, 5th Legion. 29 years. Hot-headed. Personally devoted to the throne in the specific way of a general who had been a beggar before the throne raised him. Reliable. Lyra. Vael Walker, Shadow Clan, 6th Legion. 17 years on her post. Personal devotion has, across the past 3 years, quietly become something more than professional. The body had not addressed this. Vael filed it. Drun. Hammerlord, 6th generation Trollblood, 7th Legion. 41 years. Brutal. Stupid. Loyal to strength. Will follow whoever is winning. Yana. Witch Queen, 8th Legion's commander, court advisor. 69 years on her post. Has, by the body's quiet observation across the past 2 years, been building an independent power base inside the court that the seat has not authorized. Specifically, she has been recruiting low-tier sorcerers from the southern witch covens into a personal retinue that does not appear on any Legion roster. Action against her was scheduled in the body's planning. The action had not yet been taken. Tarn. Wolf Blood, Warlord, 9th Legion. 12 years on his post. The body had elevated him to the seat after killing his predecessor in a duel. Tarn had not, at the time, been the body's preferred candidate. Tarn had been a compromise candidate the council had insisted on. Tarn had spent the 12 years since in a careful campaign of resentment that the body had failed to take seriously. Vael read the list. He read it twice. Then he wrote, below the 9 names, a single notation in the margin. Yana first. Tarn second. Drun third. Only if Tarn drags him in. The rest are managed. He read what he had written. He set the quill down. He thought. He thought about the timeline. The body's memory placed the protagonist Aren at 15. The novel's timeline had run 3 years from age 15 to age 18. The year Aren had emerged from his training to begin the campaign against the throne. The campaign had taken 2 further years. The fight had happened at the throne when Aren was 20. Vael had 5 years. He intended to use perhaps 18 months. He picked up the quill again. Below the marginalia, he wrote a second list. The second list was shorter. Aren, the protagonist, currently 15, training at the Veiled Cathedral in the Pine March Forest, far western continent. Master, Cain, former paladin of the Sunspire, retired at 81 to train the prophesied party. Party members in training. He paused. The names came slowly. He had to reach for them. He had not, in his previous life, prioritized memorizing this novel. He had read it once. He had read it years ago. He had read 70 others between it and his death. Leah, he wrote. Female lead. Healer mage. Age 16. Brand. Knight, paladin class. Aren's foster brother. Age 17. Sela. Elven archer. Age 18 or 19. He paused on the next name. It would not come. He tried for it. It would not come. He set the quill down and walked to the window and looked out at the smoke-plain horizon of his realm for a long count. The 5th hero, the witch, he remembered there was a witch, would come back to him eventually. He could afford a moment of imprecision. He returned to the desk. He wrote, beside the 4 names, strike the Veiled Cathedral before the end of the season. Kill all of them in their beds. If even one escapes, the timeline survives. If none escape, the timeline ends. He read what he had written. He underlined all of them. He set the paper aside. He rang the small bell on the desk. A servant entered within 12 seconds. He said, send for Lyra. Discreetly. The 3rd corridor, not the public approach. No record in the day's ledger. The servant bowed and left. Vael sat in the study chair and waited. Chapter 2, Lyra. Lyra arrived in 14 minutes. She came in by the 3rd corridor, in the matte black armor of the Vael Walker Shadow class generals, with her hood up. She had walked the corridor without making sound. She had passed 3 sets of guards. None of the guards had registered her passage. She removed the hood when she entered the study. She bowed at the threshold, not deeply, the bow of a senior general to her king, with the specific quality of a bow she had been making to him for 17 years. He gestured to the chair across the desk. She sat. She was 31. Her clan aged slowly. Vael walkers reached maturity at 40 and continued to 30-decade lifespans without significant change. She had black hair cut at the jaw. Her eyes were the slate gray of her clan, slit-pupilled in low light. Her hands were narrow and very still. He had, in the body's memory, watched her cross the throne hall 1,000 times. He had given her 17 years of operational authority. He had, by the body's recent observation, begun, in the past 3 years, to mark her by a different quality than he marked the other generals. He set that observation aside. He said, "Lyra, I need a strike planned. Tonight is the briefing. Execution within 30 days. She did not speak. He had been reminded by the body's memory, a general who did not speak when speech was not yet required. He continued, "The Veiled Cathedral in the Pine March Forest, Western Continent, a monastery operated by the human kingdoms as a private training facility. The facility houses 4, possibly 5, young human cultivators who are being trained by a senior instructor named Cain in preparation for a prophesied campaign against this throne. The 4 or 5 cultivators range from age 15 to 19. They are not yet at their projected combat tier. The instructor Cain is, on my assessment, at High Master tier. The facility's exterior is warded by a layered formation that I will provide to you tomorrow morning. The interior security is, by my best estimate, 8 to 12 mid-tier human paladins assigned by the Sunspire as facility guards." He paused. He met her eyes. He said, "I want every person in the facility dead. The young cultivators specifically, the instructor specifically, the paladins as a matter of cleanup. I want no survivors. I want the bodies confirmed. I want the heads of the 4 or 5 cultivators returned to this throne in sealed cases." Lyra studied him for a count of 3. She said, "The timeline. 30 days. The team composition. Yours. You will lead. You will draw whatever assets from the 6th Legion you require. You will, additionally, have priority access to the 1st Legion's heavy support if you assess it necessary. More will be informed and will provide what you request. The assault profile. Discreet. The facility's destruction must not be traceable to this throne within the first 60 days of the operation. The human kingdoms will, eventually, identify the assault as ours. The eventual identification is acceptable. The immediate identification is not. I want the human kingdoms to spend 2 months investigating before they conclude. The 2 months are operational space." She nodded. She said, "One question. Yes. In the past 30 years you have, on 3 occasions, ordered strikes against human cultivation facilities. Each time, the order specified, at your insistence, that the cultivators be captured alive for interrogation. Each time, the operation produced significant intelligence yield. The change in posture is material. May I ask the reason?" He looked at her. He decided. He gave her, on the same calibration his old life had taught him to apply to the moments where partial honesty bought more loyalty than complete withholding, a partial truth. He said, "I have, in the past 40 days, received intelligence from a source I will not yet name. The intelligence indicates that the 4 or 5 cultivators in the Veiled Cathedral are not, as we previously assessed, ordinary trainees. They are the prophesied party. The Sunspire has been preparing them since birth. They are the campaign that this throne has been waiting 93 years for. If they reach maturity, they will challenge this throne. If they challenge this throne in 5 years, the outcome, on the source's reading of the prophecy, is unfavorable." She had not moved during the sentence. She said, "The prophecy, the crown-breaker prophecy. Yes. You have always, in the past, dismissed it. I dismissed it because the source's reading is recent. The recent reading is different from the previous readings. I am acting on the new information. She studied him. She said, You are striking the cradle. I am striking the cradle. Tomorrow morning, you will have the facility's formation map. Tonight, you will brief me on initial assault concepts. Will you accept the assignment? She did not hesitate. She said, I will accept the assignment. Good. A pause. She said, My king. Yes. You have, by my reading, not slept well last night. He looked at her. He had not slept at all. The body's last sleep had been the previous evening before he had inherited it. The body's last sleep had been an old man's sleep, 3 hours, restless, the sleep of a king who had been a king for too long. He said, I will sleep tonight. The briefing is at the first bell after dinner. Bring the initial concepts. She rose. She bowed. She left through the third corridor. He watched her go. In the body's memory, the past 3 years of his observation of Lyra had built a specific quiet quality that the body had not addressed because the body had been 93 years on the throne and had stopped having time for the quality. He, in the new tenant of the body, would have time. He filed the observation under manageable. He returned to the desk. He wrote, on a fresh sheet of paper, Yana, tomorrow, before the cathedral briefing reaches her ears. Chapter 3. Yana. The Witch Queen Yana held court in her own tower on the south face of the fortress. The tower was an internal court allocation. Each demon general was assigned, on confirmation to their post, a tower or chamber suite within the fortress for personal use. Yana had been given her tower 69 years ago. She had spent the 69 years modifying it. The tower had, by the body's intelligence reports, 11 private chambers, 3 personal formation arrays, 2 private gardens for spell herb cultivation, and a private audience room where she received visitors who were not on the throne's approved list. The visitors who were not on the approved list, the body had documented across the past 2 years, included 17 low-tier sorcerers from the southern, witch covens whom she had been quietly recruiting into a personal retinue. Vael went to her tower at dawn. He went alone. He went unannounced. He walked the south-face exterior corridor with the standard guard rotation. He passed the 2 guards at the tower's external door. The guards bowed and did not stop him. The third demon king had absolute access to any chamber in his own fortress. The guard's bow was procedural. He entered the tower's ground floor. The ground floor was a public reception. A senior witch attendant, one of Yana's coven members, an old woman in dark robes with the small, careful presence of a sorcerer who had spent 40 years in a tower, stood at the reception desk. The attendant looked up. The attendant saw him. The attendant's face did the small, specific thing the face did when the wrong person walked through an unexpected door at the wrong hour. Vael said, Yana. Now. The attendant said, My king. The mistress is in her private chambers. She has not yet begun her mourning. She will require a moment to. He walked past the desk. He went up the central stair. The attendant did not follow. The attendant could not, by court protocol, prevent the demon king from walking the tower he had granted his own general. The attendant could, however, send a signal. The body's memory cataloged the tower's signal system. There was a small alert formation embedded in the staircase that the attendant could trigger as he walked. He felt the formation trigger as he passed the 3rd step. He did not slow. He climbed the 7 floors at the standard, unhurried pace. By the time he reached the 7th, Yana would have, on the body's calculation, 6.5 minutes warning. 6.5 minutes was enough time for a sorcerer of her tier to prepare a defensive formation, but not enough to prepare a coordinated assault. He had calculated. He arrived at the 7th floor private chambers at 6 minutes and 41 seconds after the formation trigger. He opened the door. Yana was at the center of the chamber, in her formal court robes, standing inside a hexagonal defensive formation she had drawn on the floor in the past 6 minutes with a stick of chalk and 3 of her personal blood vials. The formation was, by the body's assessment of her Tier 3 private formations, competent. It would hold against the standard Royal Honor Guard. It would buy her time against the Second Legion. It would, against him personally, hold for approximately 14 seconds. She knew that. She had drawn it anyway. She bowed. She did not bow fully. The formation prevented full motion at the waist. She bowed at the head. She said, "My king. This is unexpected." He stepped into the chamber. He closed the door behind him. He said, "Yana, you have been recruiting Southern Witch Coven members into a personal retinue that does not appear on the 8th Legion's roster. The count, by my office's intelligence, is 17. I am here to ask whether the 17 are an oversight, a misunderstanding, or a coup in preparation. I will accept any of the 3 answers as honest. I will respond to each one differently. Choose." She did not move for a count of 2. She said, "The 17 are an oversight. They are research assistants for a private project I have been conducting on behalf of the throne's long-term cultivation interests. The project is sensitive, and I had not yet briefed the throne. I had intended to brief in the coming weeks." He nodded. He said, "Show me the project's research notes." She said, "The notes are in a secure formation array. I will need to release them." "Release them." She moved her left hand. The formation in the floor flickered. Behind her, against the wall, a small wall safe opened. She walked to the safe, slowly, with the small precision of a sorcerer who had calculated that any sudden motion would, in front of him, end the conversation in a direction she did not want. She took out a leather-bound document. She turned. She held the document out. He walked to her. He did not, in the walking, leave the hexagonal formation untouched. He walked over it. The chalk lines smudged. The blood vials cracked. The formation collapsed at his passage. She did not protest. She had drawn the formation in the awareness that it would not protect her. She had drawn it because she required the appearance of having tried. She offered the document. He took it with his left hand. He took her wrist with his right. She did not pull away. She had calculated that pulling away was the worst possible motion at this exact moment. She held very still. He read the document at glance. The document was a fabrication. He had not, in the body's memory, ever seen the document before. The document was a 40-page treatise on the throne's interest in long-term Southern Coven integration into the Demon Legions. The treatise was, by its handwriting and its formatting and its specific use of the word integration in Chapter 2, written within the past 3 days. He looked up from the document. He looked at her face. He said, "Yana, the document was written this week. The recruitment of the 17 sorcerers began 19 months ago. The document is not the project. The document is the cover you are showing me because you anticipated, at some point in the past 19 months, that you would be standing in front of me explaining yourself. You wrote the cover 3 days ago because 3 days ago an asset you have inside the throne's intelligence office informed you that my chief of staff had requested a review of your tower's external visitor logs. You then prepared this document as the response you would give if I called for it, which I have now done." She did not breathe for the count of 2. He said, "The asset inside the throne's intelligence office is a junior clerk named Han Moore. He has been on your payroll for 14 months. The payments come from a holding company you established under a third name in the southern provinces 6 years ago. The holding company also funds the 17 sorcerers. The 17 sorcerers are training, by my best read of their travel patterns and supply requisitions, in the cellar of a barn outside the southeastern town of Hollifield. The training is in mass formation coordination, the kind of coordination required for an internal assault on a fortress of this size." He pulled her wrist toward him. She came toward him. She had no choice. He looked into her eyes from 1 foot away. He said, "Yana, the answer is coup in preparation. I gave you the chance to say so. You took the cover." The cover ended this conversation. She had time for 1 word. She said, "Wait." He did not wait. He had been holding, in his right hand on her wrist, the dual current of his own cultivation framework. The framework was the Demon King line-specific cultivation that the Dynasty had been refining for 3 centuries. The cultivation did, a direct touch on a sorcerer's pulse point, exactly what he wanted it to do. He drove the cultivation through her wrist into the channel of her primary, spell-weaving meridian. Her meridian collapsed. He drove it through her secondary meridian. The secondary collapsed. He drove it through her tertiary meridian. The tertiary collapsed. The collapses took, on his estimate, less than 4 seconds in sequence. Yana, in front of him, went from a witch queen at peak stage sorceress level to a 69-year-old woman with no cultivation reserves and no functional spell-weaving capacity. She did not fall. He still held her wrist. She looked at him. She knew what he had just done. She had felt every collapse. She said, in a voice that was now thin and old and human-sounding, "You have broken me." He said, "Yes, I am useless. I will retire. I will leave the court. I will. You will not. My king. Please. I will confess. The 17. The asset. The training. All of it. I will name every. You will name them. You will name them in the next 12 minutes. After the 12 minutes I will end you. The terms of the next 12 minutes are every name, every meeting place, every coded signal, every backup plan you have prepared in the past 19 months. You will, in the 12 minutes, also write out the executive decision tree of your coup plan. Who moves first, who moves second, what the trigger conditions were, what the assets were prepared to do. You will write this in your own hand on the paper at your desk. When the 12 minutes are done, I will read what you have written. If what you have written is comprehensive and honest, I will end you cleanly. If what you have written is incomplete or contains evasions, I will end you slowly. You have the 12 minutes. Begin. Her face, the face that had been the Witch Queen's face for 69 years, collapsed in a way that was not external but internal. The way a face collapses when the person behind it understands, completely, that the next 12 minutes are the last 12 minutes of their life. She walked to the desk. She began to write. He stood at the chamber's center while she wrote. He did not move. He did not speak. She wrote for 11 minutes and 43 seconds. She did not waste words. She had, in 69 years on the throne's court, learned how to write efficiently. She wrote 48 names, 23 meeting places, 11 coded signals, 3 backup plans, the full executive decision tree of her coup. The coup had been scheduled on the tree's first branch for the end of the autumn quarter. 11 weeks from this morning. He read it at the desk's edge. He nodded. He said, "Comprehensive. Yana, stand up." She stood up. He walked to her. He placed his right hand on the side of her face. He pulled the dual current of his own cultivation through her temple. Her heart stopped. He held the contact for the count of 3 to ensure the event was complete. He removed his hand. She fell. He caught her at the elbow and laid her on the chamber floor with the specific, precise care of a king who had decided, at the door of the chamber, that the body of an executed general would be laid out properly and not abandoned. He stood over her for a count. He picked up the document she had written. He left the chamber. He went down the 7 floors. The senior attendant at the reception desk had, in the time he had been in the upper chambers, been joined by 3 more of the tower's witch attendants. All 4 were standing at the reception, very still, with the small, focused readiness of attendants who had received the warning signal and had decided, in the past half hour, that the warning signal might not have been enough. They saw him come down the stair. They saw the document in his hand. They saw that his hands had no blood on them, and yet the air in the tower had, in the past 20 minutes, changed in a way they were each, in their own way, registering. The senior attendant said, "My king." "The mistress," he said, "Yana is dead. The 8th Legion's command falls to her seconded officer, Major Hess, effective immediately. Major Hess will be confirmed by court announcement at the noon bell. The 11 sorcerers in this tower who are on Yana's personal payroll, and you 4 know each other, are, as of this moment, executed by my authority. The captain of the third corridor guards will arrive in this tower in approximately 90 seconds. He will carry out the executions. I am informing you of the orders so that you may decide, in the next 90 seconds, whether to die standing or kneeling. The choice is yours. I will not consider it disrespect either way. He walked past them. He left the tower. Behind him, in the tower, the 11 sorcerers had, by the calculation he had set in motion, approximately 90 seconds to decide whether to die standing or kneeling. The captain of the third corridor guards arrived in 73 seconds. The captain had received his orders from the throne's chief of staff at the moment Vael had entered Yana's tower. The captain executed the 11 sorcerers in the tower over a period of 19 minutes. By the third bell of the morning, Yana's tower was empty. By the noon bell, Major Hess had been confirmed as the new commander of the 8th Legion. By the evening bell, the court had registered, through the precise informal channels by which a court registered such things, that the Demon King had killed his own Witch Queen at dawn in her own tower, with his own hand, on his own authority, for a coup the king had identified before the coup had been activated. The court adjusted accordingly. By the morning of the next day, the body's chief of staff reported that 3 additional general-level officers had requested unscheduled audiences for personal loyalty reaffirmations. Vael granted all 3 audiences. The 3 loyalty reaffirmations took, on average, 14 minutes each. The 3 officers left the audiences pale and shaken and significantly more loyal than they had been the previous morning. By the end of the week, the court's atmosphere had, by the chief of staff's quiet assessment, undergone a structural reorganization that the chief of staff said he had not seen since the body had taken the throne 93 years before. Vael accepted the assessment without comment. He had work to do. Chapter 4, The Briefing. Lyra delivered the initial assault concepts on the evening of the 3rd day after Yana's death. She came to the private audience room at the first bell after dinner with 3 rolled parchments and a small leather case containing 6 smaller documents. She set them on the room's central table. She bowed. She waited. He gestured to the chair opposite. She sat. She said, "The strike on the veiled cathedral." "Continue." She unrolled the first parchment. The first parchment was a topographic map of the Pine March Forest, the western continent's heaviest old-growth woodland, with the veiled cathedral marked at its center. She had drawn approach vectors in 3 colors. She had marked the formation array boundary at a perimeter of 9 kilometers. She had marked the facility's internal layout in inset on the lower right. She said, "The facility is not, as our initial intelligence suggested, a single building. It is a complex of 11 structures inside a central clearing. The main building is the monastery itself, 3 stories, stone, with the cultivator's personal chambers on the upper floor and the training halls on the lower 2. Surrounding the monastery are 10 outbuildings, for the paladin guard, 2 for the support staff, 1 armory, 1 stable, 1 infirmary, and 1, by my reading of its position relative to the main building, for the senior instructor Kane's private chambers." She unrolled the second parchment. The exterior formation array is layered in 4 rings. The outermost ring is at 9 kilometers, a detection ring, set to alert the senior instructor to any cultivation class entity within the perimeter. The second ring is at 5 kilometers, a deterrent ring, set to repel low-tier creatures and travelers without cultivation training. The third ring is at 1 kilometer, a combat ring, set to interfere with offensive cultivation projection from outside the perimeter. The fourth ring is at the clearing's edge, a personnel ring, set to identify any individual entering the clearing whose registered cultivation signature is not in the facility's authorized list. He listened. She continued. The 4 rings together represent, by my office's estimate, the work of approximately 6 months by a Sunspire formation master team. The work is competent. Each ring has documented vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities are not, by themselves, exploitable. Combined, they produce 3 operational entry options. She unrolled the third parchment. The third was an attack plan schematic. 3 approach vectors, 3 operational profiles, 3 estimated casualty projections. She walked him through each. The first was a frontal assault. The First Legion's full weight breached the formation rings through brute chi projection, crossed the kilometer of cleared ground around the clearing under heavy cover, engaged the facility's defenses in direct combat, kill everything inside. Estimated friendly casualties, significant. Estimated enemy casualties, complete. Estimated time from breach to facility clear, 9 hours. The second was a stealth infiltration. Vael Walker's shadow team of 9 breached the formation rings through one of the documented vulnerabilities, a tuning gap in the second ring that occurred for 47 seconds at the rotation point of each hour. By Lyra's office's 3-year monitoring of the array, reach the clearing's edge and stealth profile. Eliminate the Paladin guards and their barracks one by one in coordinated silent kills. Then enter the monastery and eliminate the cultivators and the instructor while they slept. Estimated friendly casualties, minimal. Estimated enemy casualties, complete. Estimated time from breach to facility clear, 3 hours. The third was a hybrid. Vael Walker's shadow team of 3 for the cultivators specifically, Lyra herself plus 2 senior Vael Walkers, while the First Legion's heavy cavalry under Moore's direct command engaged the Paladin Guard at the facility's clearing as a diversion. Friendly casualties, low. Enemy casualties, complete. Estimated time, 90 minutes. He listened to all 3. He said, Profile 3. She nodded. She said, I recommended it as well. With one modification. Modification? I will accompany the shadow team. I will personally engage the senior instructor Kane. You and your 2 senior Vael Walkers will handle the cultivators. She did not move for a count of 2. She said, My king, I would request that you reconsider. On what grounds? On the grounds that Kane is, by every available intelligence assessment, capable of engaging at High Master tier. Your direct engagement at that tier, against an opponent who has been training for 60 years in the Sunspire's Paladin discipline, is within acceptable risk parameters, but is not the lowest risk option available. The lowest risk option is the shadow team handles all 5 targets simultaneously, while the heavy cavalry holds the perimeter and the king holds the throne. He looked at her. He said, Lyra, my king, I am modifying the plan because, on my own quiet calculation, the senior instructor Kane is the one variable in the operation that I do not trust the shadow team to fully neutralize. The cultivators are sleeping. The Paladin Guard is conventional. Kane is, by the same intelligence assessment you have just referenced, the only individual in the facility whose response to a coordinated assault is unpredictable. I want the unpredictable variable handled by the person in the operation with the most direct control over the response. That person, for an opponent of Kane's tier, is me. She did not speak for a count. She said, Understood. Good. If I may say one further thing. Yes. My king. The shadow team's standard operating profile, when a senior official accompanies the team, includes the senior official taking the position of mission lead, with the senior Vael Walker, myself, in this case, taking the position of personal escort to the senior official. This is the protocol. The protocol exists because senior officials, even at very high cultivation tiers, are not Vael Walkers and do not have the trained stealth profile required for the shadow team's operational coordination. The protocol exists, in short, to keep the senior official from accidentally compromising the team's silence by stepping on the wrong floorboard. He waited. She continued, I will, on the night of the operation, accompany you personally. I will not assign you to one of the cultivator targets. I will manage the cultivators through my 2 senior Vael Walkers. I will stay at your side. I will manage the team's communication. I will, if Kane's engagement extends beyond your projected window, provide direct support to the engagement. The configuration is, operationally cleaner than your proposed modification. He studied her. He said, the configuration is also a configuration that places you, personally, in the room with Cain while I engage him. She met his eyes. She said, yes, you are aware that Cain, at his tier, is a personal risk to a Vael walker of any rank. I am aware. You are aware that I gave you the assignment so that I would have a team I trusted entirely. The team works best with you in command of the perimeter. The team works less well with you in the room beside me. If we are both in the room beside Cain, and Cain extends the engagement, the team's coordination at the cultivator chambers becomes the responsibility of your two senior Vael walkers without your direct support. That is, by your own profile, a degradation of the operation's overall risk profile. She was quiet for a count. She said, I am accepting the degradation. The degradation, in my judgment, is offset by the value of having a Vael walker of my tier in the room with you while you engage Cain. I will, before the operation, brief my two senior Vael walkers thoroughly. They are competent. They will manage the cultivator chambers. The cultivators are children. The shadow team will work them in their beds in under 2 minutes. The configuration holds. He looked at her. He understood, on the level of his own assessment of the conversation he was inside, that the configuration was a configuration in which Lyra had decided, without saying so, that she would be in the room with him when he met an opponent who, by every intelligence assessment, might be the only person in the world capable of injuring him. She had decided. He had not, in his 93 years on the throne, often had a general decide a thing of this kind without asking him. He said, accepted. She bowed. She gathered her parchments. She said, the operation is in 26 days. In 26 days. She left the audience room through the third corridor. He sat at the table for a long count after she had gone. He thought about Lyra. He filed the thought, again, under manageable. He would, on the night of the operation, manage it. He went to bed. He slept for the first full night the body had slept in 3 years. Act 2. Strike the Cradle. Chapter 5. The Pine March. They departed for the western continent in the 14th day after the briefing. The shadow team was, in its final composition, 7 Vael walkers plus Lyra plus Vael. 8 Vael walkers in total. Moore's 1st Legion Heavy Cavalry, the diversionary force, moved separately in 3 columns by sea crossing, with the columns rendezvousing at a forward camp in the foothills of the Pine March on the 22nd day. Vael traveled with the shadow team by a route the Legion did not know. The route was 3 teleportation relays through ancient demonic gate stones, relics from the Second Dynasty, maintained by the throne's gatekeeping order in absolute secrecy. The shadow team had used the relays before for senior infiltration operations. Vael had used them 3 times in 93 years. They were not pleasant. The third relay deposited the team on a ridge overlooking the Pine March forest at dusk on the 23rd day. The forest stretched to the western horizon, all old growth, dark blue-green in the late light. The Veiled Cathedral's location was 11 kilometers inside the canopy. The facility was invisible from the ridge. The formation rings were also invisible. Both were precisely where Lyra's parchments had placed them. She crouched beside him at the ridge's edge. She said quietly, the second ring tuning gap. 2 hours from now. 4th bell of the evening. The window opens at the bell's 3rd stroke and closes at the bell's 50th count. Understood. The team is staged. Good. He looked at the forest. He said, Lyra. Yes. The cultivators are sleeping in the upper chambers. By the facility's schedule, yes. They retire at the 3rd bell of evening. They are sleeping by the 4th. And Cain retires later. By the facility's intelligence record, he is at his desk in the senior instructor's outbuilding until the 5th or 6th bell most evenings. He is engaged in late evening cultivation review. So when we breach at the 4th bell, Cain will be awake at his desk. Yes. He nodded. That is what I wanted to confirm. The engagement begins with him at his desk, not in his bed. The desk gives him, what? 5 seconds to register the breach, and 1 second to manifest his cultivation defense. By my estimate, 6 seconds to register the breach, 2 seconds to manifest. He will be at full combat capability 8 seconds after the breach. We will need to be in his chamber within those 8 seconds. The chamber is 40 meters from the second ring breach point. 40 meters in 8 seconds. At the team's full speed, yes. At my speed. At your speed, my king. The 40 meters takes 3 seconds. The remaining 5 seconds are for you to position before Kane completes his defense. 3 seconds. Yes. He looked at the forest. He said, the breach point opens at the 3rd stroke of the 4th bell. The team moves at the 3rd stroke. I move at the 3rd stroke. You move with me. With you. The 2 senior Vael walkers move to the cultivator's chambers at the same instant. The 4 other Vael walkers move to the paladin barracks at the same instant. The full team is in motion at the 3rd stroke. Confirm. Confirmed. He nodded. He said, eat. The team eats. We have 2 hours. The team ate. He did not eat. He did not need to eat. The body had, 93 years ago, advanced past the requirement. He sat at the ridge's edge and watched the forest darken. 2 hours later he stood. The 4th bell rang in the distance. The small bronze bell at the veiled cathedral's exterior gatehouse, audible across 11 kilometers in the still autumn air. He moved. Chapter 6. The Cathedral. The second ring's tuning gap opened at the 3rd stroke. Lyra was at the gap's location. A small clearing in the forest where the formation's tuning anchor produced a 47-second window of permeability, 3 breaths before the stroke fell. Vael was beside her. The 2 senior Vael walkers and the 4 perimeter Vael walkers had positioned themselves at their respective entry points, each within their own 47-second window of one of the array's other documented vulnerabilities. The stroke fell. The gap opened. They went through. The Pine March's interior was dark in the way old-growth forests were dark at full night. Moonlight broken into fragments by the canopy, the forest floor in shadow except where it was not. Vael had, by 93 years of Demon King line cultivation, vision adequate to the conditions. Lyra had Vael Walker clan night sight, which was better than his. She led. They moved through the forest at the team's running pace, the silent run of Vael Walker stealth-class cultivators, which was a pace that the small forest creatures did not register as a passing. They reached the clearing's edge in 9 minutes. The clearing was as the parchment had shown. The 11 structures. The central monastery with its 3 stories. The paladin barracks. The instructor's outbuilding to the north. In the instructor's outbuilding, a single lamp burned at a corner window. Kane was at his desk. Vael felt his pulse settle. Lyra signaled to the perimeter Vael walkers. The 4 of them moved on the paladin barracks. The 2 senior Vael walkers moved on the monastery's upper chambers. Lyra moved on the instructor's outbuilding. Vael moved beside her. He covered the 40 meters at the speed she had estimated. The cultivation framework, the Dynasty's specific dual-current cultivation that the body had been refining for 93 years, was at full integration. He reached the outbuilding's door in 3 seconds. He did not slow. He went through the door. The door was wood, formation warded against unauthorized opening. The wards registered him at the door's threshold and dropped. They had been keyed by the body's intelligence office's quiet placement of a counter-signature in the Sunspire's facility records 11 years ago to recognize his cultivation signature as authorized for entry. It was a small piece of work that the body had done a decade earlier without specific application in mind. He, the new tenant, was grateful for the foresight. He entered the outbuilding's main chamber. Kane was at the desk. The senior instructor was 61. He looked closer to 40. He wore a paladin's traveling robes. His head was shaved. His face had the specific composed stillness of a man who had spent the past 60 years in a discipline that produced exactly that stillness. He looked up from his desk as Vael came through the door. He had registered the breach 2 seconds before. He had used the 2 seconds. He was, at the moment Vael entered, on his feet, with his cultivation defense at full manifestation, the holy light of the Sunspire's paladin tradition, visible around his body as a soft white aura. He met Vael's eyes. He said, "The Black Throne." Vael did not speak. He moved. He moved at full integration. The dual current cultivation projected from his right palm in a horizontal strike that crossed the room in less than a heartbeat. Cain met the strike with the paladin's standard defense, a vertical projection of the holy light into a barrier shaped like a slim oval shield. The strike hit the barrier. The barrier held. It held for half a second. It broke. Cain staggered backward. He had not expected the barrier to break. The barrier had been calibrated for the strongest projection he had personally tested against in 60 years. The barrier had broken on the first contact. Vael was already inside the barrier's projected zone. He had closed the distance at the moment of the strike. He took Cain's left wrist with his right hand. He drove his left palm into Cain's sternum. The sternum cracked. Cain, with 60 years of paladin discipline behind him, did not flinch. He used the contact. He drove his own right palm into Vael's side at the same moment, with a holy light technique that had been the Sunspire's elite paladin signature for 3 centuries. The technique was a soul disruption strike. It bypassed armor. It bypassed physical defense. It targeted the cultivator's soul core directly. It hit. Vael felt it. He had, for the first time in 93 years, felt a strike that actually reached him. The strike did not kill him. The strike disrupted his soul core by approximately 3% of its functional capacity. He would, on his estimate, recover the 3% over a period of approximately 11 days. It was, in the engagement's accounting, a price. He paid the price. He drove his left palm deeper into Cain's chest. The dual current cultivation moved from the sternum into Cain's primary cultivation channels. He had, across 93 years, refined a technique for the precise destruction of a target's cultivation channels at direct contact. He had used the technique twice. Once on his father at the duel that had won him the throne. Once on the previous commander of the 9th Legion in a private duel 40 years ago. He used it on Cain. Cain's primary cultivation channels collapsed. Cain's holy light aura guttered. Cain, in front of him, with a cracked sternum and collapsed primary channels and the small, still face of a man who understood that the next breath was the last one, said, "The children." Vael said, "Yes." Cain said, "All of them." "Yes." Cain closed his eyes. He said, "I am sorry, my apprentices." Vael drove his left palm through Cain's chest. The hand emerged from the back of Cain's robe. Cain's body slumped on the hand. Vael held the body up for a count of 1 to ensure the cardiac and pulmonary systems had ceased. He withdrew his hand. The body fell. He turned. Lyra was at the outbuilding's door. She had not, in the engagement, entered the chamber. She had been at the door, with her cultivation framework at full readiness, monitoring the engagement for the precise moment her support would be required. The support had not been required. She looked at Cain on the floor. She looked at Vael. She said, "The monastery. The monastery." They moved. Chapter 7. The Children. The monastery's main building had 3 floors and a central staircase that ran from the ground floor training hall to the upper chambers. The cultivators' chambers were on the upper floor, 4 chambers in a row along the south corridor, each with a single bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out over the clearing. The 2 senior Vael walkers had reached the upper corridor at the moment of Vael's breach of the outbuilding. They had been moving at full Vael walker stealth pace. They had cleared the central staircase in 11 seconds and entered the south corridor at 12. By the time Vael and Lyra crossed the clearing from the outbuilding, the 2 senior Vael walkers were already at work. They worked in pairs at each chamber. The first chamber on the south corridor was Leah's. The female lead. Healer mage, 16 years old. The senior Veilwalker's technique for sleeping targets was the technique their clan had used for 9 centuries. A small bone needle, 3 inches long, inserted into the side of the target's neck at the carotid pulse, driven inward at a precise angle that punctured the artery and the brain stem in a single motion. The technique produced unconsciousness in under 2 seconds and death in under 4. The technique did not produce screaming. The first senior Veilwalker used the technique on Leah at 12 and 3 seconds. Leah died at 12 and 7 seconds. The second chamber was Bran's. The knight, the foster brother of the protagonist, age 17. The first senior Veilwalker moved to the second chamber. Brand had, by some quiet luck or some half-trained intuition, woken at the precise moment of Leah's death. The Veilwalker entered the chamber to find Bran sitting up in bed. Bran saw the Veilwalker. Bran did the thing the Veilwalker had not expected a sleeping cultivator of Bran's age to do. He manifested. His cultivation, paladin line, was not yet at the tier Cain had been at. It was at, by Lyra's later reading of the trace, early paladin journeyman tier. It was, in a confined chamber against a senior Veilwalker who had been prepared for a sleeping target, sufficient. Bran's holy light flared. The Veilwalker's bone needle was deflected. Bran was out of bed. Bran reached for the sword on the chamber wall. The Veilwalker drew its primary combat blade, a curved Shadow Clan dagger, and engaged. The engagement lasted 9 seconds. The Veilwalker won by half a step. Brand had not been trained for Shadow Clan combat. Brand had been trained for Paladin combat. The two forms intersected unfavorably for Brand. The Veilwalker's dagger went through Brand's throat at the 9th second. Brand died at the 10th. The third chamber was Silas, the elven archer, age 19. The second senior Veilwalker had moved to the third chamber when Leah died. The second senior had reached Sila's chamber at 12 and 12 seconds. Sela was awake. Sela had heard the noise. Sela had her bow in her hand. The bow was a Sunspire-crafted bow with the Elf Clan signature, a chi-conducting weapon that allowed the wielder to discharge cultivation through arrows in a way that compounded the weapon's range and damage. She had an arrow knocked. She fired. The second senior Veilwalker took the arrow in the chest. The Veilwalker's armor, Veilwalker stealth armor, was light, formation woven, designed for silent movement rather than direct combat resistance, slowed the arrow but did not stop it. The Veilwalker fell. The Veilwalker was, in 9 seconds of dying, the first friendly casualty of the operation. Sela was already at the chamber door. She moved into the corridor. The first senior Veilwalker, who had killed Leah and Brand and was now in the corridor, engaged her. The engagement was 3 exchanges. The first senior Veilwalker was older and more experienced than the second. The first senior Veilwalker had been a Shadow Clan combat specialist for 40 years. The first senior Veilwalker's experience compensated for the elf archer's superior range advantage in the close confines of the corridor. Sela went down at the third exchange. The bone dagger took her at the temple. She died at 13 and 6 seconds. The fourth chamber was Aren's. The protagonist. Aren was, by every intelligence assessment the throne had gathered across the past 6 months, 15 years old, in the early stages of training, with cultivation potential that Cain had assessed as the highest in the facility, but with current operational capability significantly below his projected ceiling. Aren should, by every reasonable projection, have been the easiest target of the 4 cultivators. Aren had, in the 11 seconds since Leah's death, done something that the projection had not accounted for. He had, by the first senior Veilwalker's later reconstruction, heard Leah's small involuntary exhalation through the chamber wall. He had heard Bran's combat manifestation a second later. He had heard the sound of his foster brother dying. He had heard Sela's arrow discharge. He had heard the second senior Veilwalker fall. He had, in 11 seconds of registration, done a thing that 15-year-olds were not, by Sunspire training records, supposed to be able to do. He had broken cultivation tier. When the first senior Vael Walker reached the fourth chamber at 13 and 12 seconds, Aren met the Vael Walker at the chamber door with a cultivation manifestation that did not match the early journeyman tier the intelligence assessments had projected. The cultivation that came through Aren in those seconds was at high journeyman tier with the specific flavor of a forced advancement, the kind of breakthrough that occurred in cultivation case studies only in the precise circumstances of catastrophic emotional rupture. Aren had ruptured. The first senior Vael Walker engaged him. The engagement lasted 41 seconds. It was the longest engagement of the operation. In the 41st second, Aren put the first senior Vael Walker through the chamber wall with a paladin technique that the first senior Vael Walker, by the report Lyra eventually filed, had not expected from a 15-year-old. The first senior Vael Walker died in the wreckage on the other side of the wall. Vael and Lyra arrived at the south corridor at the 43rd second. They saw the corridor. Leah in her chamber, Brandon his, CeeLo in hers, with the second senior Vael Walker beside her. The first senior Vael Walker in the wreckage of the fourth chamber's wall. Aren standing in the doorway of the fourth chamber, bleeding from the side. Holy light around him at high journeyman tier. 15 years old, in a sleep shirt, with a sword from the wall in his right hand. He saw Vael. He did not, in any way that Vael could read, recognize the Demon King. But he registered, from the cultivation presence alone, that the man in the dark coat at the end of the corridor was the source of what had just happened to his foster brother and his 3 friends. He moved. He moved at the speed of high journeyman tier with the specific reckless commitment of a 15-year-old who had ruptured. He covered the corridor in 2 seconds. Vael did not move. Lyra moved. She came between Vael and Aren at the moment of Aren's third stride. She caught Aren's sword on her crossed daggers. The impact drove her back 2 paces. She held. She held because she was a senior Vael Walker at peak Shadow Clan tier, and because she had, in the moment of intercepting, used a Vael Walker technique that the journeyman tier did not have a counter for, a shadowbind that locked Aren's footing for a half-second. The half-second was enough for Vael to reach the corridor's center. He arrived behind Aren. He raised his hand. He did not strike for the soul core. He was, by his own internal calculation in the half-second of his motion, 3% depleted from Kane's earlier strike. 3% was a small thing. 3% was, against an unexpected high journeyman tier protagonist who had just ruptured, a thing he chose not to risk further. He struck for Aren's primary cultivation channels. His palm hit the back of Aren's neck. The dual current cultivation entered Aren's spine. Aren's primary cultivation channels, fresh broken into journeyman tier, only seconds old in their reorganization, collapsed. Aren's holy light extinguished. Aren staggered forward. The shadowbind released. He fell. He fell forward onto the corridor floor. He landed on his hands and knees. Vael stood over him. He prepared the soul core kill technique. He paused. He paused because, in the corner of his vision, in the doorway of the fourth chamber's wreckage, there was a 5th figure he had not, in the count of seconds of the engagement, registered. He turned his head. The 5th figure was a girl. 16, maybe 17. Long dark hair. A dark cloak. She was standing in the chamber's doorway, holding a small wooden staff with a single iron band at the head. She had not, by the assault's parameters, been in the chamber when the first senior Vael Walker entered. The first senior had reported the chamber empty before engaging Aren. She had been somewhere else. She was, Vael realized, the 5th name. The witch. The one the body's memory had not produced. She was looking at him. She had her hand on Aren's shoulder. Vael had not heard her cross the corridor. He moved to strike her. She struck first. What she struck him with was not a paladin's holy light. It was not a Vael Walker's shadowbind. It was not any of the standard cultivation techniques the body had cataloged in 93 years of cataloging human cultivation forms. It was a witch's binding, a specific witch's binding from the deep covens of the southern continent. A binding that the Demon King line's cultivation framework was, by the framework's deepest historical record, vulnerable to in a precise, narrow application. The binding struck him in the chest. It did not damage him. It did not break his cultivation. It did not, on any normal measure, hurt him. It bound him for 1 second. 1 second was enough. The witch, Mira, the body's memory finally produced the name, as if the name had been waiting for the binding to dislodge it, grabbed Aren's wrist with her left hand, and drove her staff into the corridor's floor with her right. A shadow-walking circle opened beneath them. The shadow-walking circle was, by Lyra's later reading, a witch clan emergency translocation, the kind of artifact a witch's master gave her on her formal apprenticeship to use exactly once, in exactly the kind of moment Mira had just found herself inside. The circle activated. Aren and Mira dropped through the corridor's floor and were gone. Vael's binding released a quarter second later. He moved. He moved to the corridor floor where the circle had been. The circle's residue was a small charred ring. The residue's outgoing vector was, by the small reading he took of it, to the south. The vector pointed in the general direction of a city 60 leagues south of the Pine March, the human kingdom's western coastal trading port. He stood at the residue. He breathed out slowly. Lyra came to his side. She was bleeding from a cut along her left forearm where Aren's sword had grazed her at the intercept. She said, "My king." He said, "The witch's name is Mira." I had forgotten. She was the fifth. The fifth. She is the witch member of the prophesied party. She was not in her chamber when the team entered. She was elsewhere, possibly in one of the outbuildings, possibly in the forest on a private cultivation walk. She returned to the corridor at the moment of Aren's engagement with the first senior. She used a witch clan emergency translocation. She has extracted Aren to the south. By the residue's vector, the destination is approximately 60 leagues away, the Heartcoast trading port. Lyra said, "Aren is alive. Aren is alive. Aren's primary cultivation channels are collapsed. He will require, by my estimate, at least 3 months of Master Tier healing to begin reconstruction. The Sunspire has Master Tier healers, but not at sufficient number to rebuild a fully collapsed primary channel structure in a 15-year-old in less than a year. He is, by the operation's standard, neutralized. He is not, by the operation's stated objective, dead. We will pursue. We will pursue. The pursuit will not be tonight. Tonight is, we finish the cathedral, the paladin barracks, the support staff, the outbuildings. We leave no record. The pursuit begins in the morning." Lyra nodded. She moved. The rest of the operation took 2 hours and 11 minutes. By the third bell of the morning, every other living being in the veiled cathedral was dead. The paladin barracks, the support staff in their bunkhouse, the stable hands, the infirmary's 2 healers, the senior instructor's 3 private attendants. Total kills on the operation, 31. Total friendly casualties, 2 senior Vael walkers. The 4 perimeter Vael walkers reported in at the third bell. The 1st Legion's heavy cavalry, which had been positioned in the foothills for emergency support, was informed that the support was no longer required. The cavalry stood down. Vael walked through the cathedral one final time at dawn. The corridor where the 4 cultivators had been killed was, except for the fact that Aren had not died, a complete operational success. Aren was alive. Aren was, by Vael's quiet internal accounting, the only thread that remained. He stood in Aren's chamber for a minute. He looked at the sword Aren had grabbed from the wall, fallen on the corridor floor where Aren had dropped it before Mira had pulled him through the shadow circle. He picked it up. He examined it. It was a paladin's training sword. Standard issue. Sunspire forged. Unremarkable. He kept it. He left the chamber. He left the cathedral. By the noon bell, he was in the foothills with the cavalry. By the third evening bell, he was at the gatestones. By the dawn of the next day, he was back in the Black Crown. He carried the sword to his private chambers. He set it on the desk beside the document Yana had written. 2 objects. 2 unfinished pieces. He sat at the desk and thought about Aren. He thought about the shadow-walking circle. He thought about Mira, the fifth name, the one the body had not produced when he had needed it. He thought, in particular, about the precise quality of the binding she had used. The binding was, on his quiet reading of the framework, not the kind of binding a 16-year-old apprentice which should have been able to construct on her own. The binding had been preloaded by someone older, by someone of Master Coven tier. He had, in his calculations, accounted for the Sunspire's involvement with the prophesied party. He had not accounted for a Southern Coven's involvement. On the morning he returned to the Black Crown, opened a new file in his desk's encrypted records. The new file's title was, The Southern Covens. Identify all senior masters who have, in the past 60 years, had documented contact with the Sunspire's prophecy office. He set the file to his chief of staff for immediate action. He left the chambers. He went to the throne hall. The court was already assembled for the morning audience. Word of the operation's outcome had not yet officially reached the court. Officially, the king had been at a private cultivation retreat for the past 4 days. The court had been told the retreat was scheduled. He took the throne. He held the morning audience as if the 4 days had been a retreat. By the evening bell, the court, through its informal channels, had begun to register that the king had killed, in the past 4 days, a senior instructor and 4 young cultivators in a facility on the Western continent. The court did not, on the informal channels, know who the 4 cultivators had been. The court only knew that the king had personally led a strike on a Sunspire facility and had returned with his shadow team intact. The court adjusted accordingly. The court began to fear him more than it had in 93 years. Act 3. The Court's Blood. Chapter 8. The Pursuit. He did not pursue Aren personally. He had, in the days following the cathedral, identified the pursuit as a problem that required not his hand but a network of hands. Aren and Mira had emerged from the shadow-walking circle in the city of Heartcoast at approximately the same moment Vael had emerged from the cathedral's corridor. The two had been in the city for 9 hours before Vael's Southern Intelligence Office had identified their location. They had been moved out of the city within those 9 hours by an asset the Throne's office had not previously catalogued. The unidentified asset was, by every quiet read across the next 2 weeks, connected to the Southern which Coven Mira had been trained by. The Coven's senior masters had, on hearing of the cathedral, mobilized. They had not, in any of the Throne's intelligence records, ever mobilized before. Vael read the implications. The implications were that the Sunspire was not the only faction interested in producing a protagonist capable of breaking the throne. The implications were that he had identified, in his 14th day on the throne, a second adversarial faction whose existence he had not previously been aware of. He sat with the implications for a single evening. He decided he would not pursue Aren personally. He would, instead, hunt the Southern Covens. The Coven Masters, on his calculation, were 60 to 90 years old. The Masters had taken half a century to refine the binding Mira had used. The Masters were, in their seniority and in their numbers, the actual threat. Aren was a 15-year-old whose primary channels were collapsed. Aren would, in 6 months, be a teenager with crippled cultivation who had survived an attempted execution. Aren without the Southern Covens would not, by Vael's most generous projection, threaten the throne for at least 8 years. Aren without the Southern Covens, and without the Sunspire's prophecy infrastructure would not threaten the throne in this generation. The Sunspire would be addressed in due course. The Southern Covens were the immediate priority. He gave the assignment to Skara, the Necromancer General, on a Tuesday morning. He gave it to Skara because Skara's necromancy was, by the body's quiet assessment, the most efficient method available for extracting information from senior Coven Masters once they were dead. Skara had been waiting, for 15 years, for an assignment of this category. Skara, when given the assignment, bowed and did not speak. Skara left the throne hall and began the assignment. By the end of the first month, Skara had located, killed, and interrogated the corpses of 3 senior Southern Coven masters. By the end of the 2nd month, 6. By the end of the 4th month, 19. The Southern Coven infrastructure that had supported Myra's training was, by the 4th month, substantially dismantled. The Coven leadership that survived withdrew from the continent. Myra's binding became a binding without a backing master tradition. Mira, on the throne's reading, would still be a witch. Mira would not be the witch who could preload high master bindings into apprentice-tier students. The Southern Covens were neutralized. Vael moved to the 2nd priority. The 2nd priority was the Sunspire. Chapter 9. The Coup. He did not, however, move to the 2nd priority immediately. He did not because the court, in the months following the cathedral, had developed a second internal problem that required his hand before he could turn outward. The problem was Tarn. Tarn, the 9th Legion's warlord, had, by the body's intelligence, been quietly watching Vael's actions since Yana's death. Tarn had concluded, from observation, that the throne was either no longer the throne the body had been 93 years before, or that the throne was now showing a willingness to act on internal threats that suggested an instability Tarn had not previously identified. Tarn, by the body's intelligence, interpreted the new instability as an opportunity. He began, in the 3rd month after the cathedral, to make contact with the remaining generals. He made contact with Drun first. Drun, the brutal Hammer Lord, was, by his nature, exactly the kind of general who would join a coup if the coup looked likely to succeed. Tarn presented the coup as a defensive measure. The throne was becoming erratic. The throne was killing its own generals without due process. The court required protection from the throne's instability. Drun listened. Drun, by Vael's intelligence office's quiet placement of a clerk inside Drun's personal household 2 years earlier, reported the contact to Vael within 9 hours. Vael read the report. He did not act on it immediately. He let Tarn continue. Tarn made contact with Res next. Res, the Frostfang clan mistress, was, by her own ambition, the general most likely to join a coup whose end state was the seat changing hands to herself. Res listened. Res did not commit. Res also did not report the contact to the throne. Vael noted the non-report. Tarn made contact with Skara. Skara was, at the time, on the Southern Coven's assignment. Skara responded to Tarn with the precise diplomatic neutrality of a general who was on an active assignment for the throne and did not wish to be distracted. Tarn read the neutrality as ambivalence. Tarn was wrong. Tarn made contact with Moore. Moore, the oldest general, the Iron Warden, by the body's full 93-year reading of him, heard Tarn out, thanked him for the briefing, and walked directly from Tarn's tower to Vael's private audience room. Vael was waiting. Moore entered, bowed precisely, and sat without being invited. Moore was the only general who could do this. Moore had been the body's general before the body had been the throne. Moore said, Tarn. Vael said, Tarn. He has approached me, Drun, Res, and Skara. He has not approached Voth, Kev, Lyra, or the new commander Hess. By his pattern, he believes the 4 he has approached are the 4 he can turn. What is his timeline? He has not specified. By the urgency in his approach, I would estimate within the next 6 weeks. What does he believe he has? He believes he has Drun. He has not yet realized Res is delaying her commitment to extract better terms. He believes Skara's neutrality is a quiet yes. He believes I am, flattered by his approach and considering it. Are you? Moore looked at him with the small, specific dryness of a 400-year-old demon general who had served 3 demon kings and outlived 2 of them. He said, I have not, in 400 years, joined a coup against a sitting king of this line. I am not interested in beginning the practice in my 401st year. Good. The question, my king, is how you would like the coup to end. Vael thought. He said, I would like it to end publicly. The court has, in the past month, registered that I will kill a witch queen in her own tower. The court does not yet know whether I will kill 4 generals in the throne hall in front of the assembled court. I would like to demonstrate. Moore nodded. The demonstration. By what method? Let Tarn complete his coalition. Let him bring his coalition to the throne hall. He will, by his own pattern, do this at the autumn high session, the formal full court session in 2 months. He will arrive at the session with Drun and whoever else he believes he has turned. He will, at the moment of the session's opening, make a public challenge. The challenge is the standard demon line challenge for a sitting king, the council vote, with the king's general support compared to the challengers. The challenge requires 4 general-level supporters. Tarn would need Drun plus 3 more. He believes he has them. He has Drun. He believes he has Skara and Res. He believes he has either you or, by extension if you decline him, one of the others he has not yet approached. He does not have Skara. He does not. Skara will, at the session, vote with me. Skara is, by her contract on the Southern Coven's assignment, deeply invested in completing the assignment and has no interest in switching her contract holder. Res will, at the session, vote with the side she calculates is winning. She does not have advance intelligence on Skara's vote. She believes Skara is ambivalent. She will, on her ambivalence read, calculate that her own vote is the swing. She will move with whoever has the visible numbers at the session's opening. How do we ensure the visible numbers at the opening? Lyra, Kev, Voth, Hess, yourself. 5 votes pre-secured, on the open count, before Tarn rises. 5 against, at maximum, Tarn, Drun, and Res. The numbers are visible the moment the court is called to vote. Res will fold to the visible numbers. The vote will be 5 against 2, with my own vote producing 6 against 2, plus the abstaining vote of Skara, making it 6 against 2 with 1 abstention. The challenge fails. The challenge is, by demon line tradition, met with immediate execution. Moore sat with this for account. He said, "You are baiting the public coup so that you can execute the conspirators in front of the assembled court. I am demonstrating, in front of the assembled court, that a coup against this throne fails. The demonstration is the operating principle. I would like the demonstration to be the kind that produces, in the court's collective memory, a moment that the court does not forget." Moore said, "My king, yes. In my 400 years of service to this line, I have not had a king ask my counsel on a planned public execution before. You are the only person in the court I would have asked." Moore looked at him for a long count. Moore said, "The plan is sound. I will hold the 5 votes. Lyra, Kev, Voth, Hess will be pre-secured by my own conversations across the next 2 months. I will conduct the conversations in a manner that does not alert Tarn's intelligence." "Good." Moore stood. He bowed. He turned at the door. He said, "One note. Yes. After the demonstration, when the 4 conspirators are dead, you will require replacements for the 4 legions. The 4th was Giannis, now Major Hess's. The 9th is Tarn's. The 7th is Drun's. Ressa's vacancy at the 2nd will be the 4th. You will need 4 new generals. I would recommend pre-selecting the replacements before the autumn session so that the announcement can be made in the same court session that produces the executions. The court will accept the announcement as a continuation of the demonstration. The court will not, in the same session, have time to begin politicking against your selections." Vael nodded. "I will pre-select. I will brief you on the selections in 3 weeks." Moore bowed. Moore left. Vael sat at the audience desk after Moore was gone. He thought about the conversation. He thought, in particular, about Moore. He had, in the body's full 93-year memory, taken Moore's loyalty for granted. The body had relied on Moore's reliability as a fixed feature of the court. Moore had earned that reliance. Vael, on the day's conversation, registered that Moore was a resource he had not been valuing at its full price. He would, in the months to come, value Moore at the full price. Chapter 10. The Pre-Selections. The 4 replacement generals were Hess, for the 8th Legion, formally confirmed. Already in the role since Yana's death, the court had accepted the confirmation. The formal upgrade from acting to permanent was the routine notation. Ref. Major, 2nd Legion. Res's seconded officer. He had been, by Moore's quiet observation across the past 9 years, conducting the 2nd Legion's day-to-day operations because Res had been spending her energy on political maneuvering at court. Reth was loyal, competent, and, by his temperament, uninterested in further promotion. Reth would, on confirmation, run the 2nd Legion efficiently and would not, in his lifetime, attempt to advance further. Vora, Captain, 7th Legion. Drun's seconded officer. A troll blood like Drun but with, by Moore's reading, the brain that Drun had been missing. Vora had been, for 9 years, the actual brain of the 7th Legion's operations. Vora had been allowed by Drun to do the work because Drun did not enjoy the work. Vora had no record of political ambition. Tova, Captain, 9th Legion. Wolf blood, but from a different clan line than Tarn. Tova had, by Moore's intelligence, been actively avoiding Tarn's coup approaches by claiming a fictional cultivation retreat that had kept her in the western mountains for the past 3 weeks. Tova was, on her own initiative, anticipating the autumn session as a moment of court change and had been positioning herself for the moment. Vael read the 4 names. He approved all 4. Moore began, on the 3rd week, the quiet pre-selection conversations. The 4 prospective generals were briefed in private at intervals across the next 4 weeks. None of them spoke to each other about the briefings. Each of them received, in the briefings, the throne's quiet offer of confirmation contingent on the autumn session's outcome. Each of them accepted. By the time of the autumn session, the 4 replacements were prepared. Chapter 11. The Autumn Session. The autumn high session opened at the 2nd bell of morning on the 15th day of the autumn quarter. The throne hall was filled at full court capacity. 3,000 spectators on the side galleries, the maximum the hall accommodated. The 9 generals stood at the dais's foot in full ceremonial armor. The court advisors stood at the dais's perimeter. The ambassadorial corps stood at the side gallery's front rank. The session's official agenda was the Autumn Legion Review. The session's actual agenda was not on the program. Vael took the throne at the 2nd bell. He gave the formal opening. He yielded the floor for the Legion reviews. Moore's review came first. The 1st Legion's autumn deployment, force readiness, supply chain. Moore delivered the review in 11 minutes. The review was unremarkable. The 2nd Legion's review followed. Res, at the dais's foot, stepped forward. She delivered the review. She delivered it competently. She glanced, twice, during the delivery, at Tarn and Drun in their positions further down the line. Vael noted the glances. The 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th Legion reviews followed in sequence. Each general delivered. Each review was unremarkable. The 7th Legion's review came next. Drun, brutal and stupid, stepped forward. He delivered the review with the precise, small overconfidence of a general who knew that, within the hour, the court structure was going to change in his favor. He returned to the dais's foot. The 8th Legion's review followed. Hess, recently confirmed, delivered. The review was competent. Hess returned. The 9th Legion's review came last. Tarn stepped forward. He did not deliver the review. He stood at the dais's foot. He looked up at the throne. He said, in the precise, carrying voice of a general who had been preparing the sentence for 9 months. Before the 9th Legion's review, I wish to invoke the council challenge. The throne hall, 3,000 spectators, 9 generals, the advisors, the ambassadors, fell silent. The challenge was a standard demon line procedure. The procedure had been invoked 4 times in the past 3 centuries. The procedure had succeeded once. The success had been the body's own challenge 93 years earlier, against the body's father, which had not used the council vote at all, but had been resolved in single combat. Tarn was invoking the council vote. Vael said, from the throne, In the small, clear voice the body had used for 93 years of formal court procedure, the council challenge. Tarn, state your grounds. Tarn straightened. He said, my grounds are the following. The throne has, in the past 100 days, conducted 3 operations that have not been brought before the council for review. The first was the execution of the witch queen Yana in her own tower without due process. The second was the strike on the Vael Cathedral, a facility of the Sunspire's quiet jurisdiction, conducted by the throne's personal direction and producing significant diplomatic exposure to the human kingdoms. The third was an ongoing assassination campaign against the Southern Witch Covens, currently being executed by General Scara, also without council briefing. The 3 operations together represent, in my assessment, a degradation of council governance that the seat's recent behavior has produced. I invoke the council vote on the grounds that the seat has begun to exceed council oversight. The vote will determine whether the council confirms or removes confidence in the present seat. He paused. He said, I have 4 general-level supporters of the challenge. The 4 are General Drun, who supports openly; General Ress, who supports openly; General Scara, who supports by absence. Scara is on operation and has, by the council's procedural rules, designated her support by proxy through the Southern Operations Proxy Authority. The 4th supporter is. He paused. He looked at Moore. He said, the Iron Warden. The throne hall held its breath. Moore, at the dais's foot, did not turn his head. Moore said, in the precise, quiet voice of 400 years of service, the Iron Warden does not support the challenge. Tarn's face did not move, but the small specific quality of his shoulders, the tension a general carried when a critical preposition vote did not hold, was visible across the hall. He said, the Iron Warden is mistaken about the agreement we reached in private on the 7th day of the month before last. The agreement was. Moore interrupted. Moore said, there was no agreement. There was a conversation. In the conversation, you described your concerns about the throne's recent operations. I listened. I did not, at any point in the conversation, indicate that I would support a council challenge. I indicated that I would consider the concerns. The consideration concluded the following morning, when I walked from your tower to the throne and reported the conversation. I have, since that morning, been one of the persons coordinating the throne's response to your planned challenge. Tarn's face went still. The hall registered the still face. Drun, beside Tarn, registered it too. Drun, who was brutal and stupid, took 14 seconds to register that the conversation he had thought he was inside was a different conversation than the one he had been inside. Drun reached for the warhammer at his belt. Moore said, Drun, do not. Drun, brutal and stupid, did not listen. Drun unslung the warhammer. Moore moved. Moore was 400 years old. Moore had been the 1st Legion's commander for 91 of those years. Moore had not, in those 91 years, spent his combat capability on any internal court matter. Moore spent it now. He covered the distance to Drun in 2 strides. He took Drun's wrist before the warhammer cleared the belt. He broke the wrist with a small, precise rotation. He took the warhammer with his free hand. He drove the hammer's iron face into Drun's chest. Drun, Trollblood, took the strike on the standard Troll Clan defensive chi shield. The shield held for half a second. The shield broke. The hammer continued through and into Drun's sternum. Drun fell. Drun was, by the count of seconds from the unslung hammer to the floor strike, dead innate. The throne hall was very still. Moore turned. He held the warhammer in his right hand. He looked at Tarn. He said, Tarn, the challenge has failed by procedure. You have 4 supporters short. Drun is dead. Ress is. He looked at Ress. Ress had, in the 9 seconds of Drun's death, calculated her own situation and arrived at the only available conclusion. Ress said, in a small, clear voice, I withdraw my support for the challenge. Moore said, Thank you, Ress. Tarn, you have 1 supporter remaining. the proxy from General Skara, which we will address momentarily. The challenge requires 4. You have 1. The challenge is procedurally invalid. Tarn stood at the dais's foot with his career, his life, and his cell already dead at his feet, and looked up at the throne. He said, "My king." Vael said, "Tarn, you will not speak further." Tarn's mouth closed. Vael said, "The challenge is procedurally invalid. By demon line tradition, an invalid challenge is grounds for immediate execution. The throne exercises the tradition. Tarn, kneel." Tarn did not kneel. Tarn drew his sword. Vael was off the throne and down the dais's 7 steps in 3 strides. The throne hall watched the descent in the specific frozen silence of 3,000 spectators, registering that the king of 93 years was, for the first time in living court memory, leaving the throne during a session. He reached Tarn at the dais's foot. Tarn, with his sword drawn, came at him. Tarn was a wolf-blood warlord at peak warlord tier. Tarn was, by any standard combat measurement, one of the 4 most dangerous fighters in the realm. Tarn lasted 7 seconds. Vael took the sword on the back of his right hand. The demon line cultivation framework hardened the body at direct contact with edged weapons. The technique was old. The technique had been refined by the Dynasty for 200 years and slipped inside the swing. He took Tarn's throat with his left hand. He lifted Tarn off the floor. He held Tarn at chest height in front of the assembled court. He said, loud enough that the hall heard him, "Tarn, the throne does not, in this dynasty, kill its conspirators in private." He turned Tarn slightly, so that Tarn faced the assembled court. Tarn's face was turning purple. Tarn's hands were on Vael's wrist, trying to break the grip. The grip did not break. Vael said, "The court will witness this." He held Tarn for 9 seconds. He drove his right hand into Tarn's chest. The hand went through Tarn's ribs. It closed around Tarn's heart. It pulled. The heart came out through Tarn's chest in Vael's right hand. He held the heart up. He looked across the hall. He said, "The throne. The next conspirator will be afforded the same procedure." He dropped the heart on the dais's marble floor. He dropped Tarn's body beside it. He turned. He walked back up the dais. He took the throne. The throne hall was silent for a count of 7 breaths. Then the spectators, 3,000 of them, bowed. Not the formal bow of court protocol. The full bow, forehead to floor. 3,000 simultaneous full bows. More, at the dais's foot, with Drun's warhammer still in his right hand, bowed. Rest bowed. Voth, Kev, Skara's empty position, Lyra, Hess, all bowed. The court's collective registration of what had just happened took the form, in the next 90 seconds, of 3,000 people learning, simultaneously, that the throne was not the throne it had been a year before. Vael waited until the bows held for a full minute. He said, "Rise." The court rose. He said, "The session's agenda continues. The 9th Legion's review will be delivered by Captain Tova, who is, as of this moment, promoted to the 9th Legion's command. The 7th Legion's command falls to Captain Vora, who is promoted as of this moment. The 2nd Legion's command will, on General Ress's retirement, which she will tender by the end of the day, fall to Major Reth, who is promoted as of this moment. The 4th Legion's commander Skara is, by this session's confirmation, also confirmed for an additional century in her seat. Hess is confirmed in the 8th. Moore, Voth, Kev, and Lyra retain their seats. The court will proceed. Ress, at the dais's foot, did not move for a count. Ress understood. Ress said, "My king, I tender my retirement effective immediately. I will, with your permission, return to the Frostfawn clan estates for the remainder of my service period." Vael said, "Granted. Ress, you will retire with the standard pension of a Legion commander. You will not, in your retirement, be permitted to maintain any private cultivation forces. Your personal cultivation stipend continues. Your political access ends. Will you accept these terms?" Ress said, "I accept." "Then you may withdraw." Rest withdrew. The session continued. Tova delivered the 9th Legion's review. Vora delivered the 7th Legion's review. Reth delivered the 2nd Legion's review by reference to Ress's original delivery, which Reth confirmed as accurate. The court accepted all 3 deliveries. The session adjourned at the 5th bell of evening. The throne hall emptied. 2 bodies remained on the dais's floor, Drun, with his sternum crushed, and Tarn, with his heart on the marble beside him. The fortress staff would, within the hour, remove the bodies. Vael remained on the throne for 40 minutes after the hall emptied. He sat in the silence. He had, by the day's accounting, eliminated 2 more disloyal generals, promoted 3 new ones, confirmed Hess, retained Ress in a controlled retirement, and demonstrated to 3,000 court witnesses that a council challenge to his throne ended with the challenger's heart on the dais's floor. The court would not, for at least a generation, attempt another coup. He rose from the throne at the end of the 40 minutes. He walked to the private chambers. Lyra was waiting at the chamber's door. She had not, in the session, spoken. She had stood at her position with the other generals. She had bowed when the others bowed. She had remained at her position when the court adjourned. She bowed now. She said, "My king." He said, "Lyra." The demonstration was comprehensive. It was a pause. She said, "Are you well?" He looked at her. He said, "Yes." She studied him. She said, "I will, with your permission, draw a private bath in your chambers. You have not, by my count, eaten in 2 days. The cooks have prepared the evening meal. I will bring it." He looked at her for a count. He said, "Thank you, Lyra." She bowed. She entered the chambers before him to begin the preparations. He stood in the corridor for a moment after she was gone. He filed, on his private calculation, that Lyra's position had, in the past 100 days, settled into a category of attendant the body had not previously had. The category was, he did not yet have a clean word for it. He would, in time, name it. He entered the chambers. He ate the meal she had brought. He bathed. He slept. In the morning, the court convened for the routine post-session administrative business. Vael presided. The court was the most attentive court the body had seen in 93 years. Act 4, The Wider War. Chapter 12, The Hardcoast Years. He gave the southern continent 2 years. 2 years was, on his careful assessment, the time required for the Southern Coven campaign to complete, for the new generals to bed in, for the court's internal political environment to fully stabilize, and for Aren's primary cultivation channels to either reconstruct or not reconstruct. He used the time precisely. In the first year, the Southern Coven's campaign concluded. Skara reported the campaign complete at the end of the 8th month. 41 senior Coven masters dead. The Southern Coven infrastructure, by Skara's necromancer extracted intelligence, dismantled to the level where no replacement master could be trained from the surviving apprentices for at least 3 decades. The Covens, as a network capable of producing high master bindings, ceased to exist. Tova consolidated the 9th Legion. Vora restructured the 7th. Reth ran the 2nd efficiently. The court adjusted to the new generals. The new generals' cultures, Tova's wolf blood discipline, Vora's troll blood pragmatism, Reth's cold competence, replaced the cultures of their predecessors in the routines of court life. The transition was, on Moore's monthly assessments, the smoothest court transition in 3 generations. Vael spent the first year personally on cultivation refinement. The dual current cultivation framework had, for 93 years on the body, been at what the Dynasty's records described as the 7th of 9 refinement stages. The 8th and 9th stages required, by the framework's records, a precise combination of internal motivation and external circumstance that the body had never had. The new tenant had it. The motivation was Aren, alive, somewhere on the southern continent, with the southern covens dismantled but not yet found. The circumstance was the year of consolidated peace that the court's stabilization had produced. He advanced from the 7th to the 8th stage in the first 8 months. He advanced from the 8th to the 9th in the next 3. The 9th stage was, by the Dynasty's records, the framework's terminal stage. He had reached, in the first year of his new tenancy, the precise cultivation ceiling the framework permitted. The records also noted, in a small footnote that the body had never paid attention to, that the framework's 9th stage was, according to the 3rd demon king of the 2nd dynasty, who had also reached it, not the end. The framework is incomplete. There is a 10th stage. The 10th stage is not in the records because no one in our line has reached it. I do not know how to reach it. I have tried for 100 years. I have failed. Carneth, 3rd of the 2nd, year 412. Vael read the footnote. He filed it. He had time. In the 2nd year, he hunted Aren. The hunt was patient. He did not, after the cathedral, send shadow teams. He sent, instead, individual long-term assets. The assets infiltrated. Across the 2nd year, his intelligence office identified, in sequence, 16 locations on the southern continent where Aren had been in residence for periods of weeks or months. Each location was identified after Aren had moved on. The pattern was that Aren was being moved by a circuit of southern handlers across hidden cultivation refuges, each refuge held by a small cell of surviving Witch Coven adherents and Sunspire-affiliated paladins. The pattern was, by the body's intelligence chief's assessment, standard fugitive protagonist circulation. Aren is being protected by a network. The network is decentralized. There is no single base that, if struck, ends his protection. Vael accepted the assessment. He moved to the next priority. The next priority was the Sunspire. Chapter 13, the Sunspire. The Sunspire was the central religious and cultivation authority of the human kingdoms. It was located in the southern continent's central mountain range, in a fortress monastery complex that had been the Sunspire's seat for 9 centuries. The fortress monastery housed approximately 4,000 paladins at any given time, plus support staff, plus the oracle who served as the Sunspire's prophetic anchor. The oracle was the source of the Crownbreaker prophecy. The oracle was, by every assessment Vael's intelligence office had compiled across the past 8 years of routine monitoring, the central figure in the prophesied party selection. The oracle had, at the prophecy's first issuance 49 years ago, named Aren by birth sign. The oracle had, in subsequent years, named Leah, Brand, Sela, and Mira as the party's other members. The oracle's continued visions had directed the party's training and selection of Cain as the senior instructor. The oracle was the source. The oracle's elimination would, by Vael's assessment, end the prophecy's institutional continuation. The Sunspire might, after the oracle's death, attempt to identify a replacement protagonist through other means. The replacement process would take at least 2 decades. By the time the replacement was operational, Aren would be either dead or so old that the new replacement would be the threat instead. The 2-decade window was operationally acceptable. He planned the Sunspire campaign across the 3rd quarter of the 2nd year. The plan was not a strike. The Sunspire was not the Veiled Cathedral. The Sunspire was a fortified mountain monastery with 4,000 paladins, a master-tier oracle, and the strategic central position of an entire continent's religious authority. The plan was a war. The plan required the full mobilization of the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th legions. The other 4 legions would hold the demon realm's perimeter against any opportunistic incursions, while the 5 primary legions crossed to the southern continent. The 5 primary legions, combined, numbered approximately 180,000 demons under arms. The 5 legions would, under Moore's overall field command, breach the Sunspire's outer defenses, neutralize the Paladin garrison, and capture the central oracle's chamber. Vael would, in the engagement, personally engage any master-tier paladins the Sunspire deployed in defense. The full mobilization took 6 months of preparation. The mobilization was, by the body's intelligence office's tracking, the largest military operation the demon realm had launched in 3 centuries. The human kingdoms registered the mobilization within the first month. The human kingdoms had, across the past 2 years, registered Vael's transformation from cautious aging king to active aggressive force. The kingdoms had attempted, across that period, to form a unified defensive alliance. The unification had failed, as such efforts had always failed, because the human kingdoms could not agree on which kingdom would lead. The Sunspire's mobilization to a defensive war footing was, however, the kind of trigger that overrode the inter-kingdom politics. The Sunspire commanded the religious loyalty of every major human kingdom. When the Sunspire called for support, the kingdoms responded. Across the second year's final 2 quarters, the human kingdoms mobilized. The combined human military force, paladins of the Sunspire, knights of the 7 kingdoms, allied cultivator units from the elven and dwarven enclaves, assembled at the southern continent's central plains. The force, at its peak, numbered approximately 240,000 combatants. The 2 armies, 180,000 demons, 240,000 humans and allies, moved toward each other across the autumn quarter of the second year. The engagement was scheduled, by the geography of the southern continent's road network, for the 3rd week of the autumn quarter, at the Central Plains' eastern edge, at a position the human commanders called the Ashlight Field. The human force was commanded by the High Paladin of the Sunspire, an old man named Tarvin who had held the position for 31 years. Tarvin was, by the body's intelligence assessment, at High Master tier. He was, by the same assessment, the highest-ranked active paladin in the human kingdoms. He was also, by the assessment, the only individual in the human force who was theoretically capable of engaging Vael directly. Vael had calculated for this. Chapter 14. Ashlight Field. The engagement opened at dawn on the 3rd week of autumn. The 2 armies had been positioned on the field across the previous evening. The human force held the eastern edge, anchored by the Sunspire's paladin core at the center, with the 7 kingdoms' knights on the flanks and the elven and dwarven allied units behind. The demon force held the western edge, with the 1st and 7th legions at the center, the 3rd and 9th on the flanks, and the 5th in reserve. The field between the armies was approximately 3 kilometers wide. At dawn, the human force advanced. The advance was the standard paladin offensive doctrine, measured, disciplined, with the paladin corps driving forward in coordinated cultivation projection and the 7 kingdoms' knight cavalry sweeping the flanks. The doctrine had, across the past 4 centuries of human-demon conflict, proven effective against the demon realm's standard battle formations. The demon realm's standard battle formations were not what Vael had deployed. Vael had, across the 6 months of preparation, refined the deployment specifically for the Sunspire campaign. The refinement was based on the body's quiet study of the human kingdom's paladin doctrine and on Moore's tactical experience across 4 centuries of frontier engagement. The refinement was simple in principle. The paladin doctrine relied on a coordinated forward projection of cultivation that produced, at the center of the projection, a focused tier output capable of breaking standard demon formations. The projection required, by its mechanics, a continuous tier output from each paladin in the formation. If the projection's continuity was disrupted at any point along its length, the doctrine collapsed. The refinement was to disrupt the projection's continuity. The disruption tool was, by Moore's quiet engineering across the 6 months of preparation, a coordinated barrage of Demon Clan formation pulse mines, each calibrated to release a specific anti-cultivation pulse that, at the moment of detonation, broke the Paladin projection's continuity in the 4-meter radius of the detonation. The 7th and 9th Legions had spent the 6 months of preparation manufacturing the pulse mines under Vora's direction. The 1st and 3rd Legions had spent the 6 months of preparation training in the deployment of the pulse mines under Moore's direction. The deployment doctrine was the deployment doctrine the legions had developed. At dawn on the third week of autumn, the human force advanced. The demon force did not advance. At 300 meters before the human force reached the demon force deployed. The deployment was, by the human command's reading, a coordinated cavalry retreat. The 1st Legion's center pulled back by 50 meters. The 3rd and 9th flanks pulled back by similar distances. The retreat was registered by Tarvin at the human force's center as a sign of demon-side hesitation. Tarvin ordered the human force to accelerate. The human force accelerated. The acceleration was the moment of greatest projection commitment. Every paladin in the human force was, at the acceleration, projecting at full tier output to maintain the formation's coordinated front during the speed up. At the moment of greatest commitment, the demon force activated the pulse mines. The pulse mines had been buried at 180 positions across the field's eastern half over the previous 2 weeks. The burial had been conducted by Lyra's Veilwalker shadow teams under cover of night, in operations that the human force's scouts had not detected. The 180 pulse mines activated simultaneously at the moment the human force passed the burial line. The paladin projection collapsed across the entire human front. The collapse was a structural event. The human force's coordinated cultivation output, built across an hour of formation maintenance, broke into individual outputs of varying readiness, none of which were coordinated with their neighbors. The human force, in the count of 3 seconds, went from a unified projection formation to a collection of 240,000 individual cultivators with no operational coordination. The demon force, which had been waiting for this exact moment, advanced. The advance was the doctrine the demon realm had been refining for centuries against a paladin force whose projection formation had been broken. The doctrine was, in its simplest form, kill them. The demon force, in coordinated formation, killed them. The engagement, after the pulse mine activation, lasted 4 hours. In the 4 hours, the demon force killed approximately 190,000 of the 240,000 human and allied combatants. The remaining 50,000, primarily the night cavalry on the flanks, who had been at the periphery of the pulse mine zone and had partially escaped the projection collapse, retreated. The retreat was harassed by the 3rd and 9th Legions for the next 2 days as the cavalry fled east. By the end of the 2nd day, the cavalry had been reduced to approximately 12,000 survivors who reached the Sunspire's outer fortifications. The Sunspire's outer fortifications would not hold against the 5 demon legions. Within 10 days, the Sunspire's central monastery was under siege. Within 20 days, the outer fortifications fell. Within 28 days, the demon force was inside the monastery's first wall. Within 35 days, the demon force was at the central oracle's chamber. Chapter 15. The Oracle. Vael had, during the campaign, engaged Tarvin personally on the 11th day. Tarvin had survived the field engagement. Tarvin had withdrawn with the Sunspire's senior paladin corps to the central monastery. Tarvin had organized the monastery's interior defense across the 10 days following. On the 11th day, Vael had, at the head of 100 Veilwalker assault force, breached the second wall and personally engaged the Sunspire's senior paladin corps in the second courtyard. Tarvin had stood at the courtyard's center with 18 of his senior paladins around him. Vael had walked into the courtyard alone. The fight had lasted 16 minutes. It had been the longest sustained combat engagement of Vael's life in either tenancy. Tarvin was at High Master tier. The 18 senior paladins were at Master tier. The combined chi projection of the 19 at full coordinated commitment was, by Vael's own assessment in the engagement's first minute, sufficient to threaten his 9th stage cultivation in a way no other force in the realm could. He had paid prices. He had taken 3 significant strikes across the 16 minutes. The first had been a Tarvin holy light projection that had reached his soul core and disrupted it by approximately 7% of its functional capacity. The second had been a coordinated multi-paladin pressure strike that had cracked the body's right collarbone. The third had been a focused chest strike from Tarvin himself that had penetrated the body's hardened defense and produced a deep wound across the body's lower abdomen. He had, at the 16th minute, killed Tarvin. He had killed Tarvin by a technique he had developed in the first year of his new tenancy, specifically for High Master tier opponents. The technique was a focused 9th stage projection that, applied at direct contact at the opponent's primary cultivation channels, collapsed the channels in a way the opponent could not recover from. He had practiced the technique on 3 captured human knight commanders across the past year, each at lower tier than Tarvin. The technique had worked on each. It had worked, after 16 minutes of engagement, on Tarvin. Tarvin had died at the 16th minute. The 18 senior paladins had, in the seconds after Tarvin's death, registered the death and broken formation. The Vael Walker assault force had, in the minute after, eliminated them. Vael had walked out of the second courtyard at the 17th minute with the body's collarbone cracked, the body's chest wound bleeding, and the body's soul core disrupted by 7%. The injuries had, by his calculation, required 2 weeks of recovery to fully restore. He had recovered them across the next 2 weeks while the campaign continued. By the 35th day, the demon force was at the central oracle's chamber. He arrived at the chamber personally. The chamber was, at the monastery's 3rd interior level, behind a final layered formation array that the Sunspire's senior formation masters had constructed over 4 centuries. The array was, by Moore's tactical engineering team's assessment, the highest tier formation array currently extant on the southern continent. The array fell to 7 hours of coordinated demon force projection. The chamber opened. Inside the chamber was a single woman, sitting on a low stone bench. The Oracle. The Oracle was 63 years old. She had held the position for 40 years. She was, by every public account, the longest-serving Oracle in the Sunspire's recorded history. She had silver hair, the small composed stillness of a master-tier seer, and gray eyes that did not, on first inspection, focus on any specific point in the chamber. She looked at the chamber's entrance. She did not, by Vael's read, see him in the standard sense. Seer-tier cultivators did not, by their training, rely on direct vision. She said, "The Black Throne." Vael said, "Oracle." He entered the chamber alone. The Vael Walker assault force and Moore's command staff remained outside the chamber, as he had ordered. The chamber would, by Vael's intention, be a private conversation. The Oracle gestured to a second stone bench across from her own. He sat. She said, "You have come to kill me." He said, "I have come to ask you questions. I will, at the end of the questions, decide whether to kill you. The decision is not yet made. The questions will determine it." She studied him with the unfocused gray eyes. She said, "The prophecy." "The prophecy. You wish to know what?" "I wish to know whether the prophecy is a thing you have seen, or whether the prophecy is a thing the Sunspire has produced and attributed to you for institutional purposes." She did not move for a count. She said, "Both." "Explain." "I have, at 40 years of Seer's discipline, seen many things. Some of them have been the Sunspire's interpretation. Some have been my own. The Crownbreaker prophecy is, by my private accounting, a thing I have seen. Twice. The first time was 49 years ago. The second time was 11 years ago. The 2 visions were, substantially the same. The Sunspire's interpretation of the visions and the institutional structure that has been built around the interpretation are somewhat divergent from what I actually saw. The divergence has, over the past 49 years, become operationally significant." He listened. He said, "Describe what you actually saw." She closed her eyes. She said, "I saw a young man with the cultivation potential to break a throne. I saw him in the first vision at the age of approximately 15. I saw him in the second vision at the age of approximately 26. The throne he was breaking was, in both visions, a black throne in a hall of obsidian pillars. I did not, in either vision, see the throne's occupant clearly. I saw a presence, a weight, a figure at the throne's seat. The figure was masculine, large, dark-clothed, with a cultivation framework I did not recognize. In the first vision, the young man defeated the figure and killed him. In the second vision, the figure stood up from the throne and walked toward the young man, and the vision ended before the engagement resolved. She opened her eyes. She said, the Sunspire's interpretation was that the first vision was prophecy and the second vision was a corruption of the first. The Sunspire's institutional response was to act on the first vision and discount the second. The institutional decision was, at the time of the second vision, 11 years ago, taken without my full agreement. I noted the disagreement in my private journals. The journals are in this chamber's sealed cabinet. She gestured with her chin at a small wooden cabinet on the chamber's east wall. He stood. He went to the cabinet. He opened it. The cabinet held 9 leather-bound journals. He took the most recent one. He opened it to the most recent entry. The entry was dated 3 days previously. He read the entry. The entry was a single paragraph. The Black Throne is here. The visions of the past 2 years have, in retrospect, been clear. The figure I could not name in the second vision is the figure who is, by tonight or tomorrow, going to be in this chamber asking me questions I have prepared answers for. I have prepared the answers. The answers are honest. The honesty is, by my own private discipline, the answer to the question of whether the man at the throne is a man worth the honesty. He is. The first vision is no longer the prophecy. The first vision was a possibility. The second vision is the new possibility. The young man, Aren, was the first vision's protagonist. He is, in the second vision, a wounded boy whose primary channels are collapsed and whose master is dead and whose party is dead, who is being held together by a witch girl and a network of refugees and a desire for revenge that will, by my reading of his immediate future, kill him within 5 years. He is no longer the crownbreaker. The crownbreaker, if the second vision is the operative prophecy, is, by my best reading of the second vision, the figure on the throne itself, who in the moment of standing up was unmaking the throne by becoming larger than it. The figure was, by my reading, the throne's transformation, not its destruction. I cannot tell the Sunspire this. The Sunspire's institutional commitment to the first vision is too deep. I have been preparing, across the past 2 years, to deliver the second vision's reading to the figure on the throne when the figure arrives. The figure will arrive when the Sunspire's commitment to the first vision becomes operationally bankrupt. The Sunspire's commitment has been operationally bankrupt for 1 month. The figure is on his way. Vael closed the journal. He looked at the oracle. He said, "You have been waiting for me." She said, "I have been waiting for the figure on the throne." The figure on the throne, on the night of the operative vision, was you. I prepared the journal to be read by the figure when the figure arrived. The figure has arrived. I am, by the prophecy's revised reading, at the end of my service. You are offering me your retirement. I am offering you the choice. The Sunspire's institutional structure will, on my death, attempt to identify a replacement oracle through standard succession procedure. The procedure will take, by historical precedent, approximately 2 years to confirm a replacement. The replacement will not have the visions I have had. The replacement will, by the procedure's recent corruption, be selected for institutional loyalty rather than for genuine seer capacity. The replacement will issue prophecies that the Sunspire's leadership instructs the replacement to issue. The prophecies will be institutional artifacts. They will not, in any meaningful sense, be prophecies. The threat to your throne from the post-Sunspire oracle is negligible. He said, "And if I do not kill you, if you do not kill me, I will live for, by my own honest estimate, another 9 to 12 years. I will spend those years in your custody, if you require it. I will, in your custody, provide you with whatever visions I produce. The visions will be honest. I will not, ever, provide a vision to the Sunspire again. The Sunspire's institutional commitment to the first vision has, by my own internal assessment, ended my service to them regardless of what you do. I am offering my visions to you because, by the second vision's reading, the throne's transformation that you represent is, on the southern continent's longer historical pattern, a less destructive outcome than the human kingdom's institutional resistance to the throne. I would prefer to be useful to the less destructive outcome. The choice, however, is yours. He sat with this for a long count. He said, Oracle, I will accept your retirement under my custody. You will, in the custody, continue your service. You will be relocated to the Black Crown. You will have a private chamber in the inner fortress. You will not be restricted from the kind of work you have done in the Sunspire. You will, in exchange, provide me with the same kind of honest visions you have referenced. We will, in time, develop a working relationship. The terms are open. She bowed. She said, The terms are accepted. He stood. He extended his hand. She took it. He led her out of the chamber. Outside the chamber, Moore and the Vael Walker assault force registered the Oracle's emerging presence with the surprise of a command group that had expected the encounter to produce a body. Vael said, The Oracle is, as of this moment, a member of the throne's inner staff. She will accompany us back to the Black Crown. The Sunspire's archives are to be cataloged and removed. The monastery is to be preserved, not destroyed. The 4,000 paladins are to be processed, those who surrender, releasing on standard parole terms, those who refuse, killed. The Sunspire's existence as an institutional power ends here. The Sunspire's physical infrastructure becomes a future Demon Realm research facility for the Dynasty's cultivation studies. Moore, execute. Moore bowed. Moore said, Executed, my king. The Sunspire's processing took 2 weeks. The Oracle was relocated to the Black Crown in the 3rd week. The continent's news systems, by the end of the 2nd month after the Sunspire's fall, registered the new political reality. The human kingdoms, with their religious central authority dissolved and their combined military force reduced to 12,000 survivors, had no remaining mechanism for resisting the Demon Realm's expansion. Across the 3rd and 4th months of the post-Sunspire period, 3 of the 7 human kingdoms surrendered formally and accepted vassal terms. The other 4 kingdoms held out. Vael's intelligence office began the planning for the 2nd-year military campaign. Act 5, The Broken Blade. Chapter 16, The Years Between. The 2nd-year campaign ran across the 3rd and 4th years of the new tenancy. The 4 remaining human kingdoms, Ivali in the north, Castan in the east, Vorland in the south, and the small mountain principality of Heskin in the west, formed, at the start of the 3rd year, the Pact of the Setting Sun. The Pact was the human kingdom's final institutional attempt at unified resistance. The Pact's combined military force, at full mobilization, was approximately 110,000 combatants. Vael did not engage the Pact in a single field battle. He had, in the Sunspire campaign, demonstrated that he could win a single field battle. He had, in the demonstration, also incurred personal injuries that had required 2 weeks of recovery. He did not, on his quiet assessment, require a second such demonstration. He chose, instead, attrition. The 5 primary legions deployed into the southern continent in coordinated occupation. Each kingdom received an occupying force scaled to the kingdom's population and defensive capacity. The occupying forces did not engage in direct field battles. They engaged in city sieges. They engaged in supply line interdictions. They engaged in selective elimination of the kingdom's senior military commanders through Vael Walker shadow operations. Across the 3rd year, Iverly's king died of a small specific cardiac event during a war council meeting. Across the same year, Castan's senior knight commander was killed in a hunting accident that produced, by the oracle's careful private reading of the residual cultivation, a small specific Vael Walker signature. Across the third year, Vorlin's high mage retired into self-imposed exile after his 3 apprentices died in 3 separate small accidents over a single month. By the end of the third year, the Pact's senior leadership had been reduced, by attrition, to approximately 40% of its original count. The kingdoms began, in the 4th year, to negotiate separately. Heskin surrendered first. The mountain principalities' terms were generous: vassal status, continued internal autonomy, annual tribute at 1/12 of the principality's gross cultivation production. The terms were accepted within 3 weeks. Castan followed, then Vorland, then Iverly, the last and most resistant, at the end of the 4th year. By the start of the 5th year, the southern continent was, in its entirety, under Demon Realm administration. The Demon Realm had not, in its 3-century recorded history, controlled the southern continent. The court registered the achievement with the precise, quiet stillness of a court that had, in the past 4 years, learned not to comment loudly on the throne's achievements because the throne's achievements were, by their pace and scale, the kind of thing that one acknowledged through restrained behavior rather than verbal praise. The throne accepted the restraint. In the 5th year, Vael returned to the cultivation work. The 9th stage of the dynasty's framework was, as the 3rd demon king of the 2nd dynasty's footnote had indicated, not the end. The 10th stage existed. The footnote's author had failed to reach it across 100 years of effort. The dynasty's records did not document any successor's attempt. Vael had, since his arrival in the body, suspected that the 10th stage was reachable through a method the dynasty had not previously identified. The method, by his 5th-year refinement of the suspicion, was related to the framework's source. The framework was the demon line cultivation. The demon line was the bloodline. The bloodline produced, in each generation, demons whose internal cultivation framework was structured by the bloodline's foundational principles. The principles were, by the dynasty's documentation, the principles of dominance. The framework grew through the precise mechanism of imposing the user's will on a sphere of operation. Vael had, across the first 4 years of his tenancy, imposed his will on the demon realm's court, on the southern continent's military landscape, and on the human kingdom's institutional structure. He had imposed the will at the scale of a continent. The 5th-year suspicion was that the framework's 10th stage was, quite literally, accessible to a user whose sphere of imposed will had expanded to a scale beyond what the prior demon kings had imposed. The prior demon kings had imposed will on the demon realm only. Vael had imposed will on 2 continents. He sat, on the morning of the 5th year's spring quarter, in the private cultivation chamber and tested the suspicion. The test was, he closed his eyes and reached, in the specific internal protocol of the framework, for the cultivation channel's next refinement layer. The next refinement layer was there. It had been there for an unknown period of time. Possibly years. Possibly only recently. He had not previously reached for it, because he had not known to reach for it. He spent the next 4 hours reaching for it. At the end of the 4 hours, he opened the 10th stage. The opening was, internally, the same kind of quiet structural reorganization the 8th and 9th stages had been. The dual current cultivation framework added a 3rd refinement layer. The 3rd layer integrated with the existing 2. The combined output of the 3 layers was, by his immediate internal assessment, approximately 3 times the output the 9th stage had produced. He had become, at the moment of the 10th stage's opening, the first demon king in the dynasty's 3 centuries to reach the framework's actual terminal stage. He sat in the cultivation chamber for a count of breaths after the opening. He stood. He went to the throne hall for the morning audience. He did not, in the audience, mention the 10th stage's opening. He had work to do. Chapter 17, Aren. Aren returned in the 7th year. He returned not as the prophesied protagonist of the Crownbreaker prophecy. The Crownbreaker prophecy had been operationally bankrupt for 5 years. He returned as something else. He returned as the only surviving member of the original Sunspire Train Party. After 7 years of fugitive movement across the southern and central continents, with a small personal band of associates he had accumulated across the 7 years. The band, by Vael's intelligence office's careful cataloging across the 7 years, was Mira, the witch, 23 years old now, had been training under the surviving senior witches of the Southern Coven remnants for 7 years, had reached, by Vael's reading of the most recent intelligence, mid-master tier in witches binding work. Not high master, not master tier, but mid-master was, on the band's overall composition, the most threatening individual capability the band possessed. Leah, the healer mage. Vael had killed her in the cathedral 7 years ago. He had verified the kill personally on his post-cathedral walkthrough. The intelligence office had subsequently flagged, in the 3rd year, that Mira had located Leah's body, which the cathedral's surviving staff had preserved through an early-stage witch coven ritual, and had spent 2 years on the resurrection work. The resurrection had succeeded in the 5th year. Leah was, by the intelligence office's quiet assessment, alive again, in a body that was approximately 70% of the body she had been before her death, with cultivation capability approximately 50% of what she had been. The resurrection work had been a Southern Coven specialty that Vael had not been aware existed at the cost of 2 years of Myra's life cultivation. Mira had paid the cost. Leah was back. Sela, the elven archer. Vael had killed her in the cathedral. The kill had been confirmed by the post-walkthrough. The intelligence office had not, in the 7 years since, identified any resurrection. Sela was permanently dead. Brand, the paladin foster brother, killed in the cathedral. Intelligence office had not identified any resurrection. Permanently dead. Kane, the senior instructor, killed by Vael's hand. Permanently dead. 2 new associates. The first was a knight cultivator from the small Castan resistance who had joined Aren in the 4th year. His name was Ricard. He was 26, mid-paladin tier, bonded to Aren by a debt of rescue from a Vael Walker patrol that had nearly caught Aren in the 4th year autumn. The second was an elven scout who had joined the band in the 5th year, replacing, in operational role, the dead Sela. Her name was Vael, 24, skilled, not at Sela's tier, but competent. The band, total, Aren, Mira, Leah, Ricard, Vael. 5. Aren himself, by the intelligence office's most recent reading at the 7th year, had completed the reconstruction of his primary cultivation channels. The reconstruction had taken 6 years of Myra's Coven tier healing work. The reconstructed channels were, by the office's careful assessment, different from the channels Aren had been training before the cathedral. The new channels were not paladin tier. They were not Sunspire doctrine. They were something else. Something Mira had built, in collaboration with the surviving Southern Witch Masters, that did not fit any standard cultivation tier framework. The reconstruction had, by Myra's apparent design, produced, in Aren, a cultivation framework that the Dynasty's records did not have a vocabulary for. The intelligence office had labeled the framework Witch Paladin Hybrid. The label was, on Vael's reading of the office's data, an admission of inability to categorize. Aren was, by the intelligence's most recent measurement, at approximately high master tier. The reconstruction had not fully replaced what he had lost. He was not, in raw projection, the equivalent of the cultivator he would have been if the cathedral had not happened. He was, by the office's estimate, approximately 75% of the projected ceiling. But the framework was novel. The framework was, on every paladin combat doctrine the demon realm's intelligence had refined across centuries, unmapped. Aren and his band arrived at the demon realm's western border on the 7th year's autumn quarter. They arrived openly. They presented themselves at the western border fortress checkpoint with the precise formal courtesy of a diplomatic delegation requesting audience with the Demon King. The border fortress commander forwarded the request to the throne. Vael read the request. He approved the audience. Chapter 18. The Approach. The audience was scheduled for the 7th day after the request submission. Aren's band was held at the western border fortress for the 7 days. The band was, by Vael's specific instruction, treated as honored guests. The fortress commander gave them clean quarters, 3 meals a day, access to the fortress's outer training yard for exercise, and no harassment. The fortress commander did not interrogate them. The fortress commander did not, at any point, request their cultivation profiles or their political objectives. The 7 days were, by Vael's intelligence office's quiet assessment, a deliberate operating decision. The throne was choosing to receive Aren's band on the throne's terms, in the throne's hall, in the throne's full court session, with the full ceremonial weight of the demon realm's formal court. The decision communicated a specific thing. The decision communicated that the throne did not fear Aren's band. The decision communicated, equally, that the throne intended to permit Aren's band to approach the throne hall openly, and to engage Aren's challenge, if Aren intended to issue one, on the throne's chosen ground. The court understood the decision. The court adjusted. On the 8th day, Aren's band was escorted to the Black Crown by a Veilwalker honor guard under Lyra's direct supervision. The escort took 3 days. Aren's band did not, in the 3 days of travel, attempt any escape, any sabotage, any diversion. They traveled in the small, composed silence of a band that had decided, at the western border, that they would arrive at the throne hall and accept whatever came. They arrived at the Black Crown on the 11th day after the request submission. The court was assembled for the high session. The high session was, by the court's calendar, a routine quarterly session. Vael had not, in the calendar, scheduled the session specifically for Aren's arrival. The calendar had, by coincidence, placed the high session on the day Aren's band reached the fortress. The coincidence was, by the court's quiet observation, operationally convenient. The court read the convenience as the throne's quiet planning. The throne had not, in fact, planned the coincidence. The throne had simply, by 7 years of consistent calendar management, placed all major political events at the high sessions. Aren's arrival had fallen on the appropriate calendar slot because every major political event fell on the appropriate calendar slot. The court did not need to know this. Aren's band entered the throne hall at the second bell of morning. The hall was at full court capacity. 3,000 spectators. 9 generals at the dais's foot. The advisors at the perimeter. The ambassadorial corps, now including, since the southern continent's full surrender, representatives from each of the 7, now for vassal, human kingdoms, at the side gallery's front rank. Aren walked in front of his band. He was 22. He was, by Vael's first direct visual assessment since the cathedral, taller than the 15-year-old who had ruptured into high journeyman tier in the south corridor. He was leaner. He had grown a thin dark beard. He carried, on his left hip, a sword. The sword was, by Vael's reading at 50 meters, not a standard paladin weapon. The sword had a witch coven binding etched along the blade. Mira walked at Aren's right. Leah walked at his left. Leah's body was, visible across the hall, slightly insubstantial in a way the surrounding spectators were registering as unusual. The resurrection had not fully restored her. She moved with the small, careful motion of a body that was working at 70% of its native function. Ricard and Vae walked behind. The band crossed the 400-pace approach in 7 minutes. The band stopped at the dais's foot. Aren did not bow. He looked up at the throne. He said, in a voice that carried across the hall in the small, specific clarity of a cultivator at High Master tier, Vael of the Black Throne. Vael said, Aren of the Sunspire. The Sunspire is gone. It is. I have come to challenge you. I am aware. A pause. Aren said, you knew I would come. I knew you would come at some point. The intelligence office identified your border arrival 11 days ago. I have prepared the day's schedule accordingly. The challenge is accepted. The terms are the standard demon line single combat. The combatants will be ourselves alone. The arena is this hall. The witnesses are the assembled court. The kill is final. Do you accept the terms? Aren said, I accept the terms. Then begin. Aren did not, however, move immediately. He said, before we begin, I would like to ask one question. The court can hear it. I am, by the courtesy you have shown my band, entitled to one question before the engagement. Vael said, one question. Granted. Aren said, why did you kill Cain before you killed me? He was old. He was old, and he was a good man. He had given his life to the discipline. I was 15. I was nobody. I had not yet earned the prophecy's title. He had earned every part of it. Why am first? Vael sat with the question for account. He gave Aren, on a careful private decision, an answer. He said, I killed Cain first because Cain, of the 5 cultivators in the veiled cathedral, was the only one whose response to a coordinated assault was unpredictable. The 4 others were children sleeping. The 5th was a master-tier paladin who was awake at his desk. I prioritized the unpredictable variable. The prioritization was a tactical decision. It was not a comment on Cain's worth as a person. Cain was, by every assessment my intelligence office produced, a man whose worth was not in question. I killed him first because tactics dictated. If I had to do it again, I would do it the same way. I would, however, note for your record that Cain's worth was something I did not, in the moment of the engagement, fail to register. I registered it. I killed him anyway. The killing did not require me to disregard his worth. It required me to act on tactics. Aren listened to the answer. He said, thank you for the honest answer. You are welcome. Do you intend to give me the same kind of honest answer when the engagement is concluded? I do not, by demon line tradition, give honest answers to the dead. I give them to the living. You will be, by the engagement's likely outcome, dead. The question is moot. Aren almost smiled. He said, you are confident. Vael said, I am calibrated. I have, in the past 7 years, done specific work that has produced specific capabilities. I have, in the same period, monitored your specific work. The work has produced specific capabilities. I have, on my honest assessment, calibrated the engagement's outcome to a probability I am comfortable with. The probability is high, but not absolute. I have made operational decisions to that effect. Aren said, what operational decisions? Vael said, the operational decisions are that I am, in this hall, alone. The court is here as witnesses. The generals are not engaged. The Vael walkers are not engaged. If you defeat me, by some specific small probability the calibration does not eliminate, your band will be permitted to leave the demon realm under safe conduct. The succession will pass through the Dynasty's standard procedure. The realm will not retaliate against you for the defeat. If I defeat you, by the higher probability, your band will be killed by the assembled honor guard within 90 seconds of my confirming your death. The asymmetric terms are the standard demon line single combat terms when a foreign challenger has come with a band. The terms have been observed by this dynasty for 3 centuries. The terms are public, well-documented, and not subject to negotiation. Aren listened. He nodded. He said, the terms are accepted. I would like, before we begin, to ask my band to withdraw to the side gallery. I do not require them in the engagement. I would prefer they not be in the floor's combat zone. Vael said, granted. Aren turned to his band. He spoke briefly. Mira nodded. Leon nodded. Ricard and Vae nodded. The 4 withdrew to the side gallery. The dais's floor was clear. Aren turned back. He drew his sword. He said, I am ready. Vael stood from the throne. He descended the dais's 7 steps. He stopped at the dais's foot, 5 paces from Aren. He said, begin. Chapter 19, The Engagement. Aren moved first. The movement was the High Master tier opening, a coordinated cultivation projection from the Witch Paladin hybrid framework that Vael's intelligence office had labeled unmappable. The projection was not the standard Paladin Holy Light. It was not the standard Witch Binding. It was a synthesis. The synthesis produced, at the moment of release, a column of pressurized cultivation that crossed the 5 paces between them at the speed of High Master combat acceleration. The column hit Vael's standing position. Vael was not at his standing position. He had moved, in the count of the column's release time, 2 paces to his right. The column passed him. The column hit the dais behind him. The dais's marble cracked. The court, in the side gallery, registered the crack. Aren registered Vael's relocation. Aren did not pause. Aren had, by the Witch Paladin framework's design, a follow-up projection prepared for the case of his first projection missing. The follow-up was a second column from a different angle, released at a 1-second delay. Vael had calculated for the follow-up. The follow-up released. Vael was, at the moment of the follow-up's release, 3 paces to his left of where he had been when the first column had passed. The follow-up passed him. Aren had 2 further projections in his framework's combat sequence. He released both, at staggered intervals, across the next 4 seconds. Both passed Vael. Vael had not, in the 4 seconds of Aren's opening sequence, engaged. He had only moved. The movement had been, by the Witch Paladin framework's design, precisely the response the framework could not project against, because the framework relied on coordinated projections that did not, in their design, account for an opponent who simply was not where the projection arrived. Aren stopped after the 4th projection. He registered the situation. Vael was now 8 paces from Aren's original engagement position, at a 40-degree angle to Aren's left. Vael was not, in the small visible reading of his cultivation manifestation, projecting anything. Vael had, across the 4 seconds, used no cultivation output beyond the small projection required for the relocations. Aren said, "You have been studying my framework." Vael said, "I have. For 7 years. The framework's design is impressive. The framework's vulnerability is that its combat projections rely on the opponent's standing position. I am not standing in any of the positions your framework was designed for. Your framework is calibrated for a different opponent than I have made myself." Aren said, "The calibration was for the Demon King the prophecy described. The Demon King the prophecy described was the figure on the throne. The figure on the throne, in the prophecy, did not move from the throne until the final moment." Vael said, "The prophecy's reading was outdated. I am sorry for the obsolescence." Aren said, "You have been moving for 7 years. The Demon King the prophecy described had been on the throne for 93 years. The Demon King the prophecy described was a different person." Vael said, "He was." Aren studied him. He said, "You replaced him." Vael said, "In a sense. The mechanics of the replacement are not relevant to the present engagement. The relevance is that the figure you are fighting is not the figure your prophecy was calibrated for. The miscalibration is operationally significant." Aren was quiet for a count. He said, "The framework has additional sequences. The first 4 were the opening. There are 9 total." Vael said, "I am aware. The next 5 sequences are, by my intelligence office's reading, designed for opponents at High Master tier and below. I have, in the past 5 years, exceeded High Master tier. The next 5 sequences will, on my calibration, not be sufficient." Aren said, "If the 5 sequences are not sufficient, what then?" Vael said, "If the 5 sequences are not sufficient, you will, in the engagement's mechanics, be required to draw on something beyond the framework. The framework is the visible structure of your capability. The framework's foundation is something Mira built. Mira built it in collaboration with the Southern Coven Masters Skara killed across the 2nd year. The Masters were, by Skara's necromancer-extracted intelligence, working on a Witch Paladin synthesis that was, at the time of their deaths, incomplete. Mira completed the synthesis in your reconstruction. The completion was, by my reading of the architecture, Myra's work, not the master's. Mira completed something the masters had not finished. In the absence of the masters, in the silence of the 7 years she had to complete it. The completion has produced, in your framework, a capacity the framework's visible 9 sequences do not exhibit. The capacity is, by my reading, a single terminal projection that integrates the framework's entire output into one coordinated strike. The terminal projection is, by my reading, also Myra's design. Mira designed it specifically to be used against me. Mira designed it on the assumption that I would, by the time of your return, be at the cultivation sealing my dynasty's records identified, which was the 9th stage. Myra's terminal projection is calibrated to break a 9th stage opponent. He paused. He said, I am not at the 9th stage. I have, in the past 2 years, reached the 10th. The 10th is not in the dynasty's records. Mira did not have the data to calibrate the terminal projection against it. The terminal projection, if you release it, will, on my calibration, fall approximately 17% short of the output required to break my framework. The terminal projection will, however, in the falling short, exhaust your full cultivation reserves. The exhaustion will leave you at, by my calculation, approximately 3% of your operational capability. The 3% will be insufficient to defend against my single response strike. The single response strike will kill you. Aren listened. He did not speak for a count. He said, You have calculated this in advance. Vael said, For 2 years. The calibration began at the 10th stage's opening. The calibration completed approximately 5 months ago. Aren said, You let me come here. Vael said, I let you come here because the alternative was that you continued to be a fugitive on the southern continent, a small thorn in the side of the realm's administrative consolidation, for another decade. The decade would have produced, by my office's projection, between 30 and 90 further small operations against my forces, with cumulative friendly casualties in the low thousands. The decade would also have produced, in the realm's perception, the continued narrative existence of a protagonist who might, at some unspecified future date, threaten the throne. The narrative was, by my read of court psychology, a small but persistent destabilizing factor. The narrative needed to end. The cleanest end was for you to come here, to release the terminal projection, and to die. The narrative ends with your death. The court receives a demonstration. The realm receives closure. The administrative consolidation completes. He paused. He said, I would have, if I had been able to identify your location at any point in the past 7 years, killed you on the southern continent. I was not able to identify your location. The 500 asset network I deployed could not find you, because Myra's protective bindings on your band were, at the small operational scale your band required, sufficient. I accepted the limit. I waited for you to come to me. You came. The engagement is now. The calibration is what I have just described. He looked at Aren. He said, You can release the terminal projection. The release will produce the outcome I have described. You can also withdraw. The withdrawal is, formally, not on the table by demon line tradition once the engagement has begun. The withdrawal would, on my courtesy, be granted. Your band would be permitted to leave under safe conduct. You would live. You would be a man whose primary cultivation channels are intact, whose framework is complete, whose witch is alive, whose remaining friend is alive, who would return to the southern continent and live, by my honest projection, approximately 40 more years, in obscurity, doing whatever you chose to do with the years. The withdrawal is the calibration's other outcome. Choose. Aren held the sword. He held it for a long count. Mira, in the side gallery, was watching with the focused readiness of a witch who had been preparing for this engagement for 7 years. Leah, beside Mira, was watching with the resurrected calm of a healer who had been brought back from death by the same witch and was, in the moment, registering that the man who had killed her was offering her current commander a withdrawal. Ricard and Vael were watching. The court was watching. Aren said, "If I withdraw." Vael said, "If you withdraw, you live. You return to the southern continent. The realm's administration of the southern continent continues. You will be permitted to settle in any city you choose. You will be permitted to maintain your cultivation. You will not be permitted to operate any form of military or paramilitary organization. You will be permitted to keep your band as a personal household. You will, in honest fact, be a free man living quietly in a continent under foreign administration. The arrangement is survivable. It is not, by any measure of your previous expectations, the life you trained for." Aren said, "If I release the projection." Vael said, "You die in approximately 12 seconds. Aren said, "Mira." Mira said, from the side gallery, "Aren." He turned his head slightly toward her. He did not, by the engagement's protocol, look at her directly. He kept the sword pointed. He said, "Your projection. It is calibrated short." She said, I calibrated to the 9th stage. The 9th stage was the Dynasty's terminal stage. I did not know the 10th existed." He said, "The 10th exists." She said, I am sorry." He said, "You are not the one to be sorry." A long pause. He said, "Mira, take Leah, take Ricard and Vael. Withdraw to the side gallery's southern door. The honor guard is, by the demon line tradition's terms, required to permit your withdrawal under safe conduct. The safe conduct begins at the moment I withdraw the engagement. I am about to withdraw the engagement. You will have approximately 12 hours to clear the demon realm's western border. Do not delay. Do not return." Mira did not move. She said, "Aren." He said, "Mira, I am withdrawing. The engagement is, I cannot win it. The terminal projection is calibrated short. The miss is a kill. I will not, in the engagement's outcome, accomplish what I came to accomplish. I will only die. You will, in the moments after my death, also die by the honor guard's standard protocol. I am choosing to live and to let you live. The choice is not the choice I trained for. The choice is the only choice the calibration permits." He turned back to Vael. He said, "I withdraw the challenge." Vael said, "The withdrawal is accepted." Aren sheathed the sword. He bowed. He bowed, not deeply. The bow of one cultivator to another at the end of an engagement that had not gone the way the cultivator had planned, and turned and walked back to his band. The hall was, for a count of 7 breaths, silent. The court, at the side galleries, registered the withdrawal. The court registered, in the same registration that the throne had, on its quiet calibration, permitted the protagonist of the prophecy to walk out of the hall alive. The court did not, in its registration, understand the permission as mercy. The court understood the permission as a different kind of cruelty than a kill. The court understood that the throne had, across 7 years, calibrated the prophecy's terminal moment as a moment in which the throne would not need to kill the prophecy's protagonist, because the prophecy's protagonist would, in the moment of the calibration's revelation, voluntarily withdraw from the engagement and live for the next 40 years, in the small specific weight of a man who had been the prophecy and was no longer the prophecy. The court understood the calibration as the throne's most precise demonstration of the dynasty's terminal power. The court, 3,000 spectators, bowed. Vael accepted the bow. He returned to the throne. The session continued. Aren's band, under the honor guard's safe conduct, left the throne hall at the 3rd bell. They left the demon realm by the 18th bell. They reached the southern continent's border within 10 days. They settled in Hardcoast, the small coastal port where Mira had first translocated Aren to 7 years before. They lived. Epilogue, the 10th. 3 years after Aren's withdrawal, the realm was, by every administrative measure, at peace. The 2 continents were under unified demon realm administration. The 4 vassal human kingdoms paid their tribute on schedule. The southern continent's cultivation production fed the demon realm's research priorities. The Sunspire's former infrastructure had been converted to the demon realm's premier cultivation research institute, with the captured Oracle as its first senior consultant. The Oracle had, in her custody at the Black Crown, produced 11 visions across the 3 years. Each vision had been honest. Each had been operationally useful. Vael had begun, in the 2nd year of her custody, to consult her on a weekly schedule. The consultation had, across the 2 years, produced a working relationship that the court registered as one of the throne's senior advisor relationships. The Oracle's status was, by the court's quiet adjustment, that of an inner-staff senior advisor with the formal title of Throne Seer. The title was a new title in the Dynasty's records. Vael had created it on the 2nd anniversary of her arrival. The Oracle had, at the title's creation, bowed and said, "I accept the title. The title is an accurate description of the work. I am grateful for the accuracy." Vael had said, "I am grateful for the work." The court had, across the 3 peaceful years, completed its adjustment to the throne's new operating posture. Moore had retired at the 405th year of his service. He had passed the 1st Legion's command to his own seconded officer, Velka, an Iron Warden lieutenant of 2 centuries' service, with the throne's confirmation. Moore's retirement had been the most ceremonial event the court had observed in 50 years. Vael had, at the retirement ceremony, granted Moore the formal title of Steward of the Throne's Council, an advisor position with full court access and no operational obligations. Moore had accepted the title and had, at the body's quiet request, remained at the Black Crown rather than retiring to his clan estates. Moore was, in his 405th year, the most senior advisor of the throne's inner circle. The 9 generals' positions had, across the 3 years, stabilized. Velka had taken Moore's seat. Reth, Vora, Tova, and Hess had settled into their legions. Voth, Kev, Skara, and Lyra had continued in their original seats. Lyra had, across the 3 years, moved from her general's seat to a more specific role. The role was, by the court's eventual quiet formalization, that of inner hand to the throne. The formalization had happened in the 1st year after Aren's withdrawal. Vael had, on the morning of the formalization, called Lyra to the private audience and offered her a specific position. The position was the throne's personal operational coordinator. Every assignment from the throne to the legions, every shadow operation, every external diplomatic action, every internal intelligence file would route through Lyra's office for the throne's approval. The position carried, in the court's hierarchy, the equivalent rank of a senior general. The position carried, in the throne's private hierarchy, the equivalent role of the throne's personal chief of staff. The position required Lyra to relinquish her 6th Legion command. Lyra had, without speaking, bowed. She had said, "I accept." She had, at the ceremony's conclusion, said one further thing. She had said, "My king." The position has, by court tradition, certain associated personal expectations. Vael had said, "The expectations." She had said, "The inner hand is, by tradition, a member of the throne's personal household. The membership is, by tradition, formalized through the household's standard arrangements." Vael had looked at her. He had, for the first time since his arrival in the body, registered, with the full attention the registration deserved, the specific quality of Lyra's stillness across the past 4 years. He had said, "Are you asking?" She had said, "I am informing. I am informing because the court tradition requires the informing. I am not asking. The asking would be, by my own private discipline, not appropriate. I will accept the answer the throne provides. The answer can be, the inner hand position with no associated arrangement, in which case the tradition is adjusted. The answer can be, the standard arrangement, in which case the tradition holds. I am, at this moment, informing." Vael had, at the end of her sentence, said, the standard arrangement. Lyra had, at the end of his sentence, closed her eyes for a count of 1. The count had been the only externally visible reaction her 4 years of stillness had produced. She had opened her eyes. She had bowed. She had said, "Thank you, my king." The standard arrangement had been formalized at the next high session. The oracle had, at the formalization's announcement, visited Vael in his private chambers that evening. She had said, the second vision's reading, the figure on the throne becoming larger than the throne. Vael had said, "I am aware of the reading." She had said, "You have, in 3 years of administration of 2 continents, in 7 years on the throne, in the building of your inner staff and the resolution of the prophecy's protagonist, become, by my own quiet assessment, larger than the throne." He had said, "The assessment is what?" She had said, asterisk, "The assessment is that the throne is no longer the throne. The throne is the framework you have built around your own person. The framework includes the inner hand and the throne's council and the throne's seer and the 8 legion commanders who serve at your specific direction and the 2 continents that operate, by your specific administrative architecture, as a single unit of governance. The framework is larger than any prior dynasty's framework by approximately a factor of 3. The framework center is you. The throne is incidental to the framework. The throne is, at this moment, a piece of furniture in a hall, in a fortress, in a realm, in a cultivation framework, in a structure of governance, that is, in its totality, the actual throne. You sit on the throne in the same way you sit on a chair in your private chambers. The throne is no longer the seat of power. The throne is where the seat of power is currently located. The seat of power is your person." He had listened. She had said, "The cultivation framework's 10th stage. You reached it 5 years ago. The 10th stage is, by the dynasty's records, the framework's terminal. By my reading of your current architecture, the 10th is also not the terminal. There is an 11th. The 11th is reachable from your current position. The 11th is, by my reading, accessible to a cultivator whose sphere of imposed will has expanded to a scale beyond a single dynasty's sphere. Your sphere has, across the past 3 years, expanded to 2 continents and the unified administrative structure they now operate within. The expansion is, by the framework's principle of dominance, sufficient to access the 11th. He had listened. He had said, "How do you know this?" She had said, "The second vision. I saw it 11 years ago." The vision included, in its later sequences, a moment in which the figure on the throne stood up, and the throne behind the figure dissolved, and the figure was visible, at a scale that was not the figure's previous scale. The visible scale was, by my reading, the 11th stage's manifestation. The vision was clear. I did not, until now, have the data to interpret which figure the vision was referencing. I have the data now. The figure is you." He had sat with this for a long count. He had said, "The 11th stage. Walk me through what reaching it requires." She had, at his desk, across the next 2 hours, walked him through what reaching it required. The requirements were 3. First, continued imposition of will at the 2-continent scale, with consistent operational success, for a minimum period of approximately 5 years. The 5 years were, by the oracle's reading, required for the framework's foundation to absorb the expanded sphere as a permanent operational baseline. Second, at the end of the 5 years, a specific moment of focused commitment. The commitment was, by the oracle's reading, an imposed will event of unprecedented internal scale, conducted at the precise alignment of the cultivator's own personal foundation with the foundation of the dominated sphere. Third, at the moment of the commitment, a specific kind of internal release that broke the cultivator's existing cultivation ceiling. The third requirement was, by the oracle's reading, the unknown variable. The first 2 were operational. The third was, by every dynasty's recorded attempt, the moment that had not, in any case, succeeded. Vael had listened to all three. He had said, "The third. What is the variable?" The oracle had said, "The variable is, by my best reading, the cultivator's capacity to accept that the cultivation framework is not, at its terminal stages, a framework of dominance. It is, by the third requirement's hidden architecture, a framework of integration. The framework's 11th stage is, by the third requirement, accessible only to a cultivator who has been, across the framework's prior 10 stages, a dominator, and who is, at the 11th stage, capable of stopping being a dominator. The capacity is, by the dynasty's historical pattern, the capacity the dynasty's prior kings have not, in any case, possessed." He had listened. He had, for a long count, not spoken. He had said, "You are telling me that the 11th stage requires me to stop being what I have been for the past 10 years. She had said, "I am telling you that the 11th stage requires you to integrate what you have been with something you have not yet been. The integration is, by my reading, not a reversal. It is an addition. The addition is the framework's terminal step." He had, at the end of the conversation, said, "Thank you, Throne Seer. The reading is useful. I will, in the coming 5 years, work on the requirements." She had bowed. She had left the chambers. He had sat at the desk with the third requirement for a long count. He had, in the long count, done a specific small internal review. The review was of the past 10 years. The past 10 years had been, in their entirety, the operation of a man who had become the throne by being more efficient at dominance than every prior occupant of the throne had been. He had killed without mercy. He had calculated coldly. He had refused to permit any rival operating capacity within his sphere. He had, at every operational moment that had required a choice, chosen the option that produced maximum imposed will outcome. He had not, in those 10 years, ever made a choice that produced something other than maximum imposed will outcome. He had, at the end of the review, registered that the third requirement was, by the framework's terminal architecture, a real requirement. He had also registered that the third requirement was, by his own honest read of his own architecture, possibly accessible to him. The accessibility was, by his own review, based on 3 specific small data points he had not, in the past 10 years, fully integrated. The first was Lyra, the inner hand, the standard arrangement. The second was the oracle, the throne seer, the honest visions. The third was Aren, the protagonist whose withdrawal he had calibrated. The 3 data points had, in their accumulation, produced, across the past 3 years, a quiet small adjustment in the body's internal architecture that the body had not, until the oracle's conversation, named. The adjustment was, by his own honest read, the small capacity to permit something to live that he had calculated could be killed. He had, across the past 3 years, permitted Aren to live. He had, across the same period, permitted more to retire honorably. He had, across the same period, given Lyra and the oracle their formal titles. The permissions were, by his own 10-year operating doctrine, inefficiencies. The inefficiencies were, by the framework's third requirement, exactly the integration the 11th stage required. He had registered the integration. He had, at the registration, felt, in the back of the body's cultivation framework, the specific small movement of a layer that had not, in 10 years on the throne, ever moved. The movement was the 11th stage beginning to become available. He had not, at the registration, opened the 11th stage. The opening required the further 5 years the oracle had specified. He had, however, identified that the opening was accessible. He had stood from the desk. He had, for the first time since his arrival in the body, walked to the chamber's eastern window and stood looking out at the demon realm at sunset. The realm had, by his administration, become a unified 2-continent structure under his architecture. The architecture would, in 5 more years, become the foundation for the framework's terminal stage. The terminal stage would, by the oracle's reading, make him, at its opening, a cultivator on a scale the dynasty had not produced. He had stood at the window for a long count. He had, at the end of the count, registered, with the small quiet honesty he had developed across the past 3 years, that the man at the window was not the man who had inherited the body 10 years before. The man who had inherited the body had been a transmigrator with a half-remembered novel and a precise willingness to dominate. The man at the window was, by his own quiet read, a king with 2 continents and 3 living people he had, against the dominance doctrine, chosen not to kill. The 3 were Lyra, the Oracle, and Aren. The 3 were, by the framework's terminal architecture, the 3rd requirement. He had, at the registration, laughed once. It was a small dry laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had spent 10 years optimizing for one outcome and had, in the optimization, produced, by accident, the precise architecture required for a different outcome. He had returned to the desk. He had begun the planning for the next 5 years. By the next 5 years, he would, by the Oracle's reading, be at the framework's 11th stage. By the next 5 years, he would, by his own quiet projection, be, by every measure of cultivation capability, the strongest individual on the planet. By the next 5 years, he would also be, by the integration the 3rd requirement had quietly already begun, a different king than the king who had inherited the throne. The court would not, in the 5 years, register the difference clearly. The court would register only that the throne's operations had become slightly less brutal across the period. The reduction in brutality would be, by the court's quiet observation, approximately 15% across the routine operations and approximately 5% across the strategic operations. The court would attribute the reduction to the throne's matured operating style after the protagonist's withdrawal. The court would be partially correct. The remaining percentage would be the integration. The integration would, at the end of the 5 years, complete. The 11th stage would, at the end of the 5 years, open. The dynasty would, at the 11th stage's opening, have its first king who had reached the framework's actual terminal. The continent, both continents, would not know. The 11th stage's opening would be a private event in the cultivation chamber on a Tuesday morning in the 10th year after the original transmigration. It would, however, on its opening, settle the matter. The matter was, by Vael's quiet, honest read across the chamber's evening light, settled already. He sat at the desk. He picked up the quill. He wrote, on a clean sheet of black-veined paper, the start of the next 5 years' operational plan. The plan was, by its first line, administrative. The plan would, in its eventual completion, also be the architecture of the framework's terminal step. He worked. The evening continued. The throne hall, far below, was quiet. The 2 continents, further below, were at peace. The man at the desk was, by every honest accounting of the dynasty's terminal stage, the king the dynasty's 3 centuries had been building toward. He worked. End Book 1.